All right. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Rules Committee. This is a specially called Rules Committee for the purpose of reviewing candidates that have applied for the vacancy in the Division 10 position for the Davidson County General Sessions Court. Let me give you a couple of guidelines about what we're going to do. We're going to have, they are outside, they're in the committee room right now, and they will be, we're going to bring them in one at a time. We're doing it by alphabetical order, and what I will do is I will ask them a couple of questions to start with, the requirements of what's required by the charter in terms of length of time that practice law, length of time they've lived in Davidson County, and also there's an age requirement, so we're going to ask all those things as well. And then we're going to give time for each member to take up to 2 minutes to introduce themselves to the committee, and then we're going to open it up for questions. We'll start with the Rules Committee members first, okay? And then we'll open it up to all members. All members are welcome to participate, and we certainly hope you do. So let me tell you one other thing as we start. I think the Vice Mayor has made it very clear to us and through the correspondence that have gone out that this is a very important process. We are selecting someone, an individual, to fill a position on the bench. And obviously, this vacancy has been opened up by a difficult and unique situation. And so we understand the importance of what we are doing tonight and the importance of what we're going to do 2 weeks from tomorrow night in terms of selecting someone to fill this role. I would ask that you take this very seriously. It is very important to the courts. It's very important to the people who use the courts, and it's very important to the citizens of Nashville. So thank you for your attention, and we are ready to get started. Any questions from anybody on the Rules Committee or any other members before we get started? Mr. Glover?
Thank you, Chair. I just want to make sure I'm not on this committee. I assume it's the standard protocol, committee members first, and then if we have additional questions, then those of us who are not on the committee are able to ask.
That is correct.
Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you. Anybody else? Any other questions before we get started? Seeing none, we are ready to go. The first candidate we're going to call in is J. Michael Clemens. Mr. Clemens, welcome. If you'll just have a seat right here. So, ladies and gentlemen, members of the council, our first candidate is J. Michael Clemens. And so, Mr. Clemens, I'm going to start by asking you a couple of questions, and then I'll give you about 2 minutes to introduce yourself to the members of the council, and then you'll be taking questions, all right? So, pursuant to Section 14.04 of the Charter, are you licensed to practice law by the Supreme Court of Tennessee for no less than 5 years prior to the election of this office?
I am.
Okay. And you may want to pull the microphone up a little bit. Should be on. Okay. Have you lived in Davidson County for no less than 5 years?
I have.
I think I said that right. So you've lived in Davidson County for at least 5 years.
I have.
And 3, you're not less than 30 nor more than 65 years of age at the time of qualification for this position.
I'm not. I'm in between.
Okay. And I will also say that, and this goes for all the candidates that have applied, there's a requirement pursuant to Rule 44 of the Rules of the Council that all candidates file timely and appropriate questionnaire and resume. and all candidates have done that, including Mr. Clemens. So, Mr. Clemens, with that, I'm going to give you about 2 minutes to introduce yourself to the members of the council that are here, and then we will start taking questions.
Okay. My name is Michael Clemens. I am a native Tennessean, but I was born and raised in Lebanon, Tennessee. Actually moved to Nashville about 7 years ago. Yeah, well, it was 7 years ago because it was 2 weeks before the flood. And let's see, I got my undergrad degree at the University of Tennessee in business marketing, and I attended the National School of Law and graduated in 2005. While I was there, I was still living in Lebanon. While I was there, I clerked for a criminal defense attorney in Lebanon by day, and then would drive to Nashville to attend school at night. Once I graduated from Nashville School of Law, I began practicing at Rochelle McCullinall's in Lebanon, which I liked that firm. It was great for me as a first job because it was sort of a full-service firm. They handled, I mean, you name it, domestic law, criminal, civil, real estate. So I got to sort of do a little bit of everything and figure out what I liked, what I didn't like. I did about half and half criminal and civil work there. That's where I sort of, I guess, found that what I enjoyed doing was civil litigation. So around that time, 2008, I decided I wanted to move out of Lebanon and focus more on general civil litigation. So I came to Nashville. I started working in Nashville for Blackburn and McCune, which was a general civil litigation firm, and worked there for about 2 or 3 years. Then actually left with Gary Blackburn, who's Judge Blackburn's husband, and went with him and another law associate there to a different firm, worked there for about 2 or 3 years. And then in 2013, my current law partner, John Ray Clemens, who's a state rep and who I'm not related to, he spells his name with 2 M's and I spell mine with 1, but we've known each other since we were children. We opened our own firm in 2013. And since that time, I've focused primarily, like I said, on general civil litigation. It's a small boutique firm. It's really just he and I, and I'm the managing partner in that. So I've had quite a bit of experience in both practicing law and managing and running a business at the same time, which I think would uniquely qualify me for this position in that, one, I have experience in practicing law while running a business and figuring out how to efficiently run things, but also the fact that I've had experience in both the criminal and civil arena, because as I understand it, the Division 10 is going to go back to hearing both criminal and civil matters. And so I've had experience in both. I feel like I'm knowledgeable in both and could bring back integrity and work ethic and efficiency to that judgeship.
All right. Thank you. Okay. So we will start entertaining questions from Rules Committee members. Council Lady Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, Mr. Clemens.
Hello.
With your experience at the General Sessions Court, do you observe a good, practice or bad practice, and what is your opinion of how court has been proceed while you are appearing in the court, and what was the good point, and what was the improvement point, and what would you suggest if you were to become a judge?
To be quite honest, unfortunately, I've had a lot of bad experiences in General Sessions Court, most of which revolve around, I guess you would say, punctuality. I can't count how many times I've gone to court at 9 o'clock when it starts, and nobody's even on the bench till 11 o'clock. And what makes it even more frustrating for everyone in the room, the people who are there trying to just have their day in court, but the lawyers is, especially when you're in there for a matter that really is going to take 5 minutes, but you end up being there for 4 hours. Then you've just got to charge that time to the client. So it's just not I've had several bad experiences where it wasn't run very efficiently. Now, that's not to say that's happened every time, but I think the main focus that needs to, that every judge should have there is maintaining that everybody there is getting their fair day in court, because I think General Sessions Court is, for a lot of people, the first and only experience they have in the judicial system. And so it's important to, be on time so that you can run the court efficiently, because I know that there's also a huge docket and there's so many things to get through. So, I mean, if you don't start on time, it's going to go even longer. But I think the important thing is being there on time, being prepared, knowing, and being impartial. That's another thing that I've not had this problem in General Sessions Court, but another issue that I know a lot of people have is, whether it's true or not, is it seems like there's some partiality sometimes on behalf of some judges where there's maybe a bias towards, be it if it's a criminal matter, towards somebody with the district attorney's office or somebody in the public defender's office or a private attorney. And quite frankly, I think that's another thing that would uniquely qualify me for this job, is because I'm sort of a outsider in this insider's game. I haven't worked for the district attorney's office, haven't worked for the public defender's office, so I don't really know anybody in those offices. So if I were on the bench, it's not, I wouldn't have any appearance of bias towards someone who's involved in either one of these particular offices, because I've never worked with them.
Council Lady Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Clemens. If I may, you said some judge appear to be not, impartial. Would you like to clarify that? I think it's a bit kind of serious, allegation. So maybe you want to kind of clarify that, your statement? Yes.
Well, and like I said, that particular statement was not in regards to Davidson County General Sessions Court. It's actually just been my experience in other courts, and to be honest, it's not actually a perception of mine a lot of the times, but it's a perception that clients have a lot of times. And of course, a lot of that comes from if they didn't get the result they wanted in court, or things didn't go exactly the way they wanted, then they start sort of looking for other reasons why that might have been, and they tend to think, well, why was the judge, he seemed to show partiality towards this particular lawyer or that particular witness. But I think that's one thing that is important as a judge, no matter what court you're in, to make sure that everybody that comes before the court feels like they were heard, they were spoken to and not at, they had their day in court, and that justice was served.
So I will have one more follow-up question and give you the mic to the other members. One more question is, you said efficiency and punctuality is very important. How are you planning to improve the efficiency of the court?
Well, like I said, I've had quite a bit of experience in the past few years of both managing a practice while practicing law. So I've got that experience of not just having sort of one focus, but having to look at things not only from a legal perspective, but from a business perspective, and making sure that that there's not a lot of unnecessary expenses, or just that things are run as most efficiently as they can be. I mean, and for me personally, I think punctuality is an important thing regardless. So for me, it would just be a matter of making sure that not only I, but the other people who are in the court, whether it be bailiffs, clerks, that everybody knows that there's a certain time to be there, everybody knows what their duty is, and that everything's run like a well-oiled machine every day.
Council Lady Johnson, anything else?
Thank you, Chair. I will give floor to other council members. I'm sure they will have more questions as well.
All right, thank you. I'll work. Technical difficulties, hold on. That didn't work. Council Lady Haywood.
Thank you. As a prospective judge, what do you consider to be your greatest strength and your greatest or your weakness, if you have any?
I feel like my greatest strength is just a passion for the law and for learning, continuing to learn, because I'll be the first to admit I don't know the answer to everything. I mean, anybody who's being honest, I think, would say they don't. But I've had such a wide array of legal experience in the past, I feel like I could bring that to the bench, and if something were to come up that I didn't know the answer to, I'm sort of just a naturally curious person anyway, so my first thing I would want to do is to read up on it and learn about it, again, to make sure that whoever's in front of me, whether it be a criminal defendant or somebody who's there on a civil matter, or a detainer, whatever the case may be, has their day in court and feels like they were actually heard. Weakness, I'm not going to say I don't have one. I've just got to think.
One area that you feel like you're not as strong, maybe we'll say it like that.
Well, that's a good one. I think perhaps maybe a weakness I would have is since the General Sessions Court handles both criminal and civil matters, like I said, I've handled criminal matters in the past, but it has been a few years since I handled criminal matters, so there would definitely be some self-education I would have to do there to sort of bring myself up to speed on things, but like I said, that's not anything I would shy away from doing anyways, but there's probably definitely candidates who are more qualified as far as criminal matters go than I am.
Okay. So how would you prepare yourself to handle a case involving an unfamiliar area of law? And I think you've probably answered that, but how would you prepare yourself in a nutshell?
Well, I think the important thing is to not, whenever the case is in front of you, is to not just sort of make an arbitrary decision off the cuff. That's not what being a judge is about. That's what nobody who's in front of a judge wants to have happen. I think what would need to happen is take a short recess, go back, do some quick research or whatever needs to be done to make sure that the decision that I'm giving is in line with the letter of the law and that both sides understand the reason behind the decision. So whether they win or lose, they leave knowing why the decision was made.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Council Lady Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome to our chambers. Are you planning on running for this seat if you are appointed or not appointed?
Honest answer is right now I would plan to run again, but who knows what happens in 2 years. I mean, like I said, I've never had any sort of judge position. I've never clerked for a judge. This is really something that, for me, I feel like is just sort of a natural progression for me because, like I said, I've love the law, and it's just sort of a next step. But I mean, it could be that I get in there and like, this isn't for me. But as it stands, I can't fathom that would be the case, though. So my current plan would be to run again if appointed.
And obviously, with a lot of the things that have been in the news lately, there's been some extra light on some of the specialty courts that the former judge handled. Would you want to take over those specialty courts? Do you have an opinion on specialty courts?
I definitely think specialty courts are a good idea. I sort of going back to what I said with Ms. Haywood's answer, I don't know that if I had my druthers that I would choose to head up a drug court, because like I said, it's not really where my knowledge base lies now. But if that was what the court needed, I would definitely do whatever needed to be done to get myself knowledgeable and to handle that, because I do think they are an excellent idea. I think the drug court was a great thing. I think rehabilitative justice is important. So I would definitely do whatever I could to help in that arena.
Well, thank you for your honesty and being in our hot seat, and the best of luck to you.
Thank you.
Councilman Leonardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Clemens, I appreciate you being here. I will say that obviously our general sessions courts are a little bit different than Judge Tatum and Judge Berry, which are great judges, and I love my experiences up there in Wilson County General Sessions Court. But my question to you is this: if you were to get appointed, you could wave a magic wand, and you're the presiding judge here in Davidson County General Sessions Court, and there's one thing that you could change about how we operate our general sessions courts here in Davidson County, what would that be?
I know this is probably, if I have a magic wand, I would probably create more courtrooms and judgeships, quite frankly, because every time I have appeared in general sessions, it's packed. And I know that's, beyond anybody's control. The docket is what it is, but when you have so many people in there at one time, and everybody's case is of the utmost importance to them, I think that's when it sort of gets difficult for everybody to leave there feeling like their time was well spent and valuable, and they were heard and they had their day in court. But again, that's if I had a magic wand. I know financially that's probably not a realistic thing.
Councilman Hastings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just like to follow up with you and thank you for being here. Of course, again, like the rest of my colleagues say, in the hot seat, because I'm quite sure it's very, very hot right now, especially being in a place of something that you're not familiar with. Right. I definitely understand that. But my question goes into what makes, if you could paint a picture to us, what would make you different from the other candidates that will come before us today? I don't know if you know them all, but what is that one characteristics that will make you different and make you very unique within the metropolitan system to actually do the job effectively? I've been in, I understand that there's different things, strengths and weaknesses, which is Council Haywood actually talked about. But what is that one thing that you have, and it has to be general, that you have that can bring out the core that will be able to benefit us in such a way to where we know, listen, this court is actually making a difference here in the city. So would love for you to speak on that. Thank you.
Thank you. I think a couple different things, which I may have already actually touched on, but one is, and I don't know any of the other candidates that well. I know a little bit about them, but I do think, unless I'm wrong, that I'm the only candidate that hasn't spent most of their years practicing criminal law of some sort, be it public defender's office or in the DA's office. So I think that's one thing because like I said, I myself would have to do some brushing up on the criminal law, but I think all the other candidates on the flip side are going to have to do the exact same thing for civil law, which is actually a lot more wide-reaching because it's everything from property disputes to, landlord-tenant issues, that sort of thing. And on that same sort of note, like I said, since I haven't practiced in the criminal arena, or especially for the public defender's office or the DA's office, I've not sort of been in that sort of echo chamber the past few years where I know all the same people. I'm used to working, things being run a certain way, and I think I would just bring a freshness to it because I would have no preconceived notions about where the attorney who's in front of me is coming from, be it whose office they're from or whether they're a private attorney or from out of town. So I think just the fact that I've had a different legal experience in the past, mostly civil, is what makes me different from the other candidates.
Thank you. Council Lady Vercher.
Thank you, Chair. I've never been part of the Rules Committee, so I don't know if you guys stand up, if you sit down, but I'm used to standing up in the chamber, so.
You can do whatever you'd like.
I want to say thank you for being before us. It takes courage to do this, and I wish you the best of luck on this journey.
Thank you.
For me, I have really just a simple question. General Sessions, a General Session judge, their interaction is with the common folks. So if you were, let's say we're looking into the future, if you were a judge now, what would people say about you? Would they classify you as a firm but fair judge? Would they classify you as you're there but you don't relate judge? What would your colleagues say about you as it relates to your overall demeanor and practice?
I think firm and fair would be a good description. I'm extremely open-minded person, and one thing I cannot stand is a bully, and that's one type of judge I would not be, because I don't think that's good for anybody in the courtroom, especially, like I said, the people who are leaving, because lawyers, we ourselves already have enough of a stigma and jokes and all that behind us in the whole legal system. So I think what's important is to make sure that the people who come into the court feel like they were heard, but that they also completely understand the reasoning behind the decision that was made, and that they know it has nothing to do with their religion or the color of their skin or their sexual orientation, but that it has simply to do with the facts of the case. I know that emotions get involved in lawsuits a lot of time. I've had this talk with clients a lot about you need to sort of ease your emotions and look at this just at the facts, because that's how the judge is going to look at it, or should look at it. But I think that's the important thing, is that the person who's before me, be it a criminal defendant or a civil plaintiff or defendant, again, knows that the decision that was made, whether they agree with it or not, was fair and was simply based on the facts that were presented and on law.
Council Lady Vercher, anything else? All right, thank you. Council Lady Dow.
Thank you, and thank you for being here. I just have a quick question to ask, and you've actually touched upon some of the ones I had. But do you think judges have an obligation to improve the public's understanding of the court system?
Yeah, I think They do. I mean, I don't know that as far as like going out and doing press junkets and making the general public at large understand it, but I think that when people come into court, that's your job as a judge. I mean, as a public servant of the court, that they're coming before you for you to hear their case. And I think it's important for them when they leave to understand. I mean, I think it's super important also especially in a criminal situation, when a person comes into court to understand, especially if they're entering some sort of plea of guilty or anything like that, that they understand exactly what they're pleading to, that they understand the consequences if they later go out and violate probation or anything like that. I think it's important that the judge has that sort of discussion, like I said, with talking to plaintiffs and defendants, not sort of at them. I feel like probably a lot of times people who appear before the court who are not lawyers feel like they never really got to participate, that the lawyers talked and the judge talked to the lawyer, and their lawyer might have just been like, just be quiet, let me handle this. And I think it's important that they are heard and that they feel like they were heard and that they understand the reasoning behind whatever decision was reached.
Okay, but you don't feel like it's the judge's responsibility, obligation to go out into the public and educate them about the court system. It's more once they come before you within the courthouse.
Well, I think I'm getting hung up on the word responsibility.
Well, let me change that. Do you have
it.
an obligation? Do you think you have an obligation to educate the public about the court system as a judge? I guess that's a better word.
Right. Well, I mean, I think generally speaking for judges, I don't know that it's their obligation to do it, but I personally would have no problem with it and would actually love to educate people on the law, especially young people or young people like school age, but also college, just understanding the law so that they can understand maybe if it's something they would like to get involved in themselves.
Thank you.
Thank you, Council Lady. No one else in the queue? I believe that's all. Thank you, Mr. Clements, for being here. You are dismissed. You are welcome to stay, or you can go home. So thank you very much for applying, and I appreciate you being here. All right. Sam Coleman is next. Mr. Coleman, welcome. If you'll just sit right here up in front. So, Mr. Coleman, we're starting out by just asking you a series of questions, and that microphone should be on.
Test, yes, it's on.
Are you licensed to practice law by the Supreme Court of Tennessee for no less than 5 years prior to the election to this office, if you were to be elected?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I am.
All right. And you have been a resident of Nashville, Davidson County for no less than 5 years?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have been.
All right. And then you are no less than 30 years of age or more than 65 years of age?
Yes. I made it.
I will also indicate that you also filed your appropriate questionnaire and resume pursuant to Rule 44. You filed that timely, so thank you. So we're giving everyone basically 2 to 3 minutes to introduce themselves to the committee and to the members of the council at this point. So, Mr. Coleman, the microphone is yours.
Well, obviously, my name is Sam Coleman, and I am a native of Louisiana. I came to Tennessee some umpteen years ago. I came to Tennessee State to play football, where I played for 4 years, well, 5 years at that time, and went on to get my master's degree and worked for the Department of Corrections. From the Department of Correction, it turned into DCS, and from DCS, I spent some 32 years in state government. I manage a development center, Woodland Hills Youth Development Center. I started working the shifts and made it up to supervisor, and from there I became a manager. Went to law school in 1984, completed in 1989, started practicing law in 2001. While with the Department of Correction, I moved to the central office after having been superintendent at Woodland Hills Youth Development Center and working in security. I've managed well over 200 people while at the youth center. I helped them move from non-accredited to accredited status. I also worked in our central office. I worked as a trainer. I trained over 5,000 people around the state of Tennessee in various subjects, sexual harassment, violence in the workplace, and what have you. In 2010, I ran for state representative. I was the Democratic nominee. I lost in 2010. And in 2010, I opened up my practice, which I started practice in 2001, but I opened up my practice full-time, where I practice now. My office is on Donaldson Pike, 211 Donaldson Pike, Suite 208. I practice basically in about 5-6 areas. The main area is criminal law. 60% of my practice is in criminal law. The other 30 to 35 is in civil law. And I do a little bit of probate work as well as family law. I practice in juvenile court. So basically, that's my practice. I have a variety of clients. I don't necessarily call myself a specialist. I'm the kind of lawyer that take the cases that come to me. However, I don't take cases beyond the scope of what my practice is. I supervise 2 people. I have a paralegal and a part-time secretary, and we do fairly well. So that is my practice, my work. It's on my resume, my application. I dare not bore you with it. I'm happy to take any questions that you may have for me. I can tell you I have a 25-year-old son. He completed his first year of law school. I'm awful proud of him. I hope he get a chance to go back next year. That we're not sure of. But as it relates to that, I am a third-term council member. I enjoy public service work. I represent the 33rd District in Antioch. My neighbors enjoy me, and I enjoy my neighbors, and I am prepared to take your questions.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Coleman. Council Lady Murphy.
Are you sure you're prepared to take our questions?
I would like to think so.
I'm going to follow up on questions that I asked already, very similar. If you are appointed by your fellow council members, do you plan on running for the seat? And if you are not appointed, do you plan on running for the seat?
I plan on running for the seat, but like anything else, my mind is focused on May the 16th. I don't go too far past that. I have a lot of obligations in my district, but right now it is my plan to receive the nomination, and it is my plan to run for office.
Where do you see the role of specialty courts in the overall general sessions, and would you like to take over the drug court that previously the judge was assigned to?
Right. Well, I see the specialty courts are based on the need, based on what the presiding judge think is the need. Obviously, the court that's vacant right now is the drug court, but I can imagine that someone coming in need to fill in the rotation and find out where you best fit. There may be an opportunity for the judge to use me in other places. Obviously, there's going to be a learning curve for anyone, so going back directly to drug court may not be the best answer for the team. It is a 11-man team, 11-person team, and 1 person is out right now. So what I hope to do is go in and fill in where I'm needed, but I'm happy to learn any subject matter that the presiding judge think would be helpful to our judiciary system in the general sessions.
Great. Thank you, Sam. Best of luck.
Thank you.
Councilman Mendez.
Thanks. Feels weird to be asking you questions. Just a 2-part question. I'd like you to describe what the qualities are of a successful judge, and then in particular, as part of that question, all of us who have tried cases, been in a courtroom, I'd like it if you could get down to like a granular level of what are the practical things in a courtroom that that you see good judges do that make a difference to the experience in the courtroom.
Okay, thank you. As to the first question, the role and duties of a general session judge. The General Sessions Court, I describe it as the court of common sense, and we have various levels. We have General Session, Circuit, Chancery, Court of Appeals, and the Supreme Court. In your General Session Court, that's where you'll find most people that interact with the law for the very first time, whether it's a traffic ticket, whether it's a dispute with your neighbor, or whether or not you're being stopped for driving without license, or any one of those things. It is the very lowest level. And so for that reason, a general session judge needs to have a variety of qualities. In addition to that, he needs to have an understanding of the rule of law, because the court is not a comedy situation. Even though you may have some hilarious and horrendous things, you need to be serious because you're dealing with people's property and their money and their lives. So at the same time, while it is dealt with in a loose way because it's not a court of record, it is just what it says, general session, and most people call it small claims court. But we do a lot of things, in particular on the criminal side. You have criminal cases that are felon that start there that will have to travel up to a higher court. But the general session judge has an awesome role of being somewhat of a mediator, somewhat of a person that makes decision and rule by the rule of law. However, he does or she does have some capacity to fashion remedies in cases where they can, particularly in landlord-tenant type cases, or in disputes where you have two neighbors without a lawyer bickering. You can fashion remedies that will sometimes take care of the problem. So to answer the question as to the general session judge, he or she need to be well-rounded, founded in the law, strong enough to abide by the law, and let the rule of law be the precedence, not rule on your emotions. Now, as it relates to what I think a good general session judge does, I think a general session judge should learn, and I have practiced in not only Davidson County, but 7 surrounding counties, and I've had a chance to see some very good general session judges, and the one quality I see that each one of them have is patience and understanding. First, you must be competent. You must know the rule of evidence. Whatever court you go in, that is the foundation. You must know the rules of evidence, because the evidence guides this courtroom. A lot of people see a lot of things from the stories they watch on TV, and they hear various things, but a lot of time it's not admissible, and it's just glorious and sensation. So general session judge really need to know the rules of evidence, even though it's a court of no record, because it's not recorded there. Everything starts over at the next level. So the qualities that person must have is a good understanding of the law, patience, competent, and able to really listen at both sides of the coin. One of the things I think is a mistake is when a judge tries to start fashioning and doing things on their own, taking the law in a manner in which the founding fathers did not intend for it to be in, by rendering favors, being unfair, and siding up. That is something you cannot do. You have to rule by the rule of law at all time. Even though there may be some situations that come to your mind, and there's a situation like a disparity in the people that are in jail, I do not believe in my heart that you can set legislative reform from the bench. That is a different subject. You have to rule by the rule of law, but you have to be fair. And when you do that, I think both defendant and plaintiff, respondent, or claimant will feel good because they had their day in court.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Coming. Council Lady Haywood.
Thank you, Chair. Well, it's obvious to me that you're knowledgeable, and you certainly have the charisma. You're extremely charismatic. I'm wondering what motivated you to seek this position.
That's a very good question. Obviously, I have 15 years in public service. I started running for office in 2003, and I'm here in 17. A few years ago, the judgeship position came available, and people from the community asked me about running. But at that point in time, there were certain things going on in my life. I had just lost an election, and it just was not time. But it has always been my dream and my desire to be a judge. It's just that it was not that time. And in a particular situation where we are now, I didn't start out running for a judge. I started out to be the council person of the 33rd District, and if in fact the neighbors wanted me to come back, I would come back for another 4 years. Unfortunately, we've had a glitch in our system, and now we need repair. The number one thing I think all of us need to do is concentrate on repairing the integrity of the judiciary. I know I am the person that can restore that kind of confidence in people. The first order of any society is justice. And I do believe that I have the ability to do just that and to get the citizens back on track as it relates to fairness.
Thank you. That was great. So, in my heart, I believe there's a time and a season for everything under the sun. So, I think I have gleaned from that you feel like this is your time and your season.
I think it's by divine timing. I did not search. I was not going in the direction of being a general session judge, although I've admired general session judges from around the corner, from a perspective, from where I sat in the audience and defending cases. And I always thought that I wanted and I could. It's just that this situation has availed itself. I am here, I'm now, I'm ready, and I can be the candidate that will restore integrity in our judiciary system.
Thank you.
Council Lady Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councilmember Coleman. I really appreciate sharing your passion. And my question is, what do you think about our current judicial system? Do you think some people deserve to be in the jail?
Yes, I do believe some people deserve to be in jail over the right thing and with the right perspective. There are some people who need to be there to pay back their debt to society, but at the same time, we have an obligation to don't warehouse people and make them better citizens than what they were when they came in. I believe in the rule of law. I believe that you should pay for your crimes. I believe we should treat the mentally ill. But I think that if, in fact, you're found to be guilty, you must pay the price for it. But it's up to us to provide a humane society and help people develop as they come out and face society again.
Thank you. One more question is, previous candidate mentioned the current General Sessions Court is lacking efficiency. What is your thought about it? And if the General Sessions Court is working quite well, or your observation, and if it's not, your plan to improve it?
I think our general sessions work well. I know each one of the judges from a distance. They have a role. They're broken up their assignments into team, and it has worked well. The good thing about it is that they're ever changing. There are new concepts that are coming. They're catching up with social media, putting forms online. I think our two clerks, our civil clerk and our criminal court clerk, does a very good job. I think we have a good staff. I think it's working well. What they need is this 11th person to join the team. But I think we have a good court system. I think that I can fill in and be the utility guy to continue to strengthen the team, then allow the voters next year to determine who should be there until 2022.
Thank you. Best of luck to you.
Thank you.
Councilman Leonardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Councilman Coleman, I see you, in court, all right, and so I know that I mean, just like, I see Marty Zygas, or I see the public defender, Ms. Diener, Larry Hager, you know, a lot of the same folks in the trenches doing the same stuff every day. And so I want to make sure I'm very fair in this, and so I'm going to ask everybody the same question.
Sure.
And that is, if you were to get appointed and somehow you just immediately walked into the presiding judge of General Sessions Court and you had this magic wand, what would be the one change or the very first change that you would make in Davidson County General Sessions Court?
To be perfectly honest with you, I would not know that change. I think you have to get there and learn what's going on before you can make a change. The most important thing is to be a team player, to find out where you fit. Our General Session Court worked quite well, in my opinion. I don't know all the broken parts. I do know we have an integrity gap. That's the thing that I will begin to work on. As it relates to what need to be changed, they're forever changing the dockets. We have 1B, we have 5D, we have the General Session mixing in. There may be a role for me to take on an assignment that I don't know about right now. The good thing about me is that I am a team player. And the General Session judge has to have a wide variety of knowledge of all subjects, not just criminal law, civil law, landlord and tenant. I have those skill sets, and I can work on a team, bring civility, and restore integrity in our judiciary system. That's what I can do.
Thank you, Councilman Coleman. Good luck.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Pulley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate this opportunity, and great to see you up there, Councilman Coleman. So I have a couple of questions for you. I want to start with experience. You have alluded to some of that, but I want to get specific with you. As I look over your resume, there's a time where you served for a pretty good bit of time with the Department of Children's Services as Internal Affairs Program Coordinator, Security Specialist, Director of Security, and a group home counselor. And you also were shift supervisor at Woodland Hills. During those times, did you ever try cases in court?
Well, I did. I became a lawyer in 2001, and the times that I tried cases, I used my annual time away from work. Most of my cases were personal injury where I did not have to appear in court because I could not moonlight. So at some point in time, I had cases that I didn't have to go to court, but on the days and times that I did, I used my annual leave, and I tried cases in several counties, including Davidson County, but I did not try cases in juvenile court because I was connected to the juvenile system.
So you were doing basically two things at the same time. You were a private lawyer and you worked for these agencies at the same time. Is that what you're saying?
Well, what I'm telling you is that I had two careers. One, I worked as a state employee, and my state work was bifurcated from my judiciary work. And any work that I did, as it relates to my law practice, it was civil work and not criminal, based on the fact I worked in the criminal system.
Okay. Thank you. And from 2010 to the present, is the majority of your work criminal, or do you have a litany of civil work as well?
Well, as I said initially, the bulk of my cases, or the bulk of my caseload is in criminal, 60%, but also I practice in civil court quite a bit. So 30% would be in the civil side, 10% would be in probate, and the other 5% would be in family law.
Okay, thank you. I want to get to, you brought up the issue of integrity, and quite clearly that's a very big issue in this appointment and the election moving forward. So I want you to speak to that, because one of the things that I think we have to clearly recognize is when you move from being a lawyer to a judge, there's an enormous amount of power that goes with that position. And all of a sudden, you're thrust with that power and how to manage it. I can tell you from being elected as a council member, you know, people treat me differently as a council member than they did as a citizen. And, you know, we get to weigh in on things that we really didn't with a little bit more oomph than we had as a regular citizen. So I put together a little accountability system for myself to keep me in check. You know, I just go home and look at my son in the eyes, and if I don't do the right thing, I hear about it. So I want you to speak to what it is that you can bring to this position from the standpoint of integrity, ethics, and character that will allow us to count on you to really do the right thing as a judge. And if you have such manage accountability system. Tell us about it.
Thank you. I worked for the state of Tennessee for 32 years. If you were to pull my jacket, you would see an excellent report. I have always received 5s in my state employment. I have always been at the top of my rank. I've supervised people at Woodland Hills. I've supervised people in the central office. I've had to travel in state cars. I have no reports. I have nothing in my record would indicate that I have ever been in any kind of trouble whatsoever, either off the job or on the job. I taught sexual harassment in the workplace to over 5,000 state employees. I know how important it is to remain ethical and responsible. I have supervised over 237 people for 5 years or more. I know what it means to have integrity. But at the same time, I think you have to be tough because managers are tough. And if you're going to get things done, you have to move. So I have disciplined people, I have terminated people, and I provided corrective measures. As a lawyer, I've had some very tough cases, and everybody that I've defended has not been innocent. And I have gotten people off who I know who've not been innocent. But the way our system works is everybody deserves a defense. And I was fortunate enough, and I hope I had the skill sets enough to convince the jury that that person deserved to be not incarcerated and fashion other remedies. I think integrity is the highest mark of disposition because of how it came about. If, in fact, we had a member of the judiciary would have died, would have retired, it would have been different. But Nashville is going to be looked at on a national scene, and the person we need to send need to be of the highest integrity and have the skill sets to maintain that and manage people as well, but more importantly, play on a team. You don't go to the general session as an individual, you go as one among 11, you play by the rules, you play tough, you earn the position, and you respect your co-judges and employees. That's what I think about integrity.
Thank you for that answer, and my experience with you has been just that. I do want to add one more thing to that, and that's bias. I think I've spent 35 years appearing before judges, and there is no question some of these judges have bias toward one side or another, to the extent that I've seen members of law firms recuse themselves before judges because they know there's an implicit bias on the part of that judge towards that individual. So I want you to speak to that a little bit and tell
Absolutely.
us how you plan on addressing that so that it doesn't happen in your court.
Well, you know, unfortunately, and this may get me bad marks, I am going to be biased because I am human. I continue to pray for neutrality. And when I catch myself being biased, I think I have the strength to step back. And if I catch myself being unfair, I think I can go to a presiding judge and say, I cannot do this, not because I'm strong enough, but I have so much connection. I think it's so important to be fair. I think it's a disproportionate number of African-American men in the penal system. But guess what? That is not my place to fight social reform from the bench. What I need to do is teach class, educate people, help them that way. But from the bench, you have to be one way, and that is strict, fair, and if you catch yourself being biased, have the galls and the wherewithal to pull back. But I have to tell you, being the human that I am and my experiences, there are just some things that I will be biased on, but I just hope and pray I have the strength to always come back to the middle.
I appreciate that answer because it is an honest one. I think we all fight that, and I appreciate you being upfront about that. The only one other question, I know you're focused on the nomination, but you have to have in the back of your mind if whether or not you intend to run if you are appointed to this position.
Well, the question is absolutely yes. However, I have constituents out there that believe in me. We have a lot of work to be done, and we need to figure out a way how I would handle off my assignment as a council member there. I have some ideas. I have not talked to the vice mayor about that. I do plan on running, but I do place the constituents of the 33rd district first. Once I get that matter solved, then I can set my sights on running. Whenever I sign my name to anything, I intend to win. I intend to roll back the curse of the council once I get the nomination.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your candor.
Thank you.
Councilman Hastings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to Councilman Coleman, seemed like you practiced last night in the mirror, you know, get an A++, I tell you, hitting it. But I just wanted to, first of all, congratulate all of the guys who are coming up, because you're in the hot seat right now. And I already know that you feel it. And especially being here, it's kind of strange being here with the people that you work with all the time. So, but my question is basically this: being the person that you are, and I know some parts of you, but being the person that you are, what makes you different from any other candidate that you suspect, some of those guys you know who are also coming after you and all of that good stuff, or people that have been here before you? What makes you different, and how is that characteristic going to make this position or this seat much better than it ever has been in history?
Thank you. I have the necessary prerequisite to carry out the duties of the General Session Judge. First of all, I have 32 years of excellent work service. I have administrative skill. I practiced law in this town, in this state, for 16 straight years without a reprimand from the bar, any sanction whatsoever. I taught at Daymont Institute. I taught at National College. I taught while I worked for the department. What I am telling you is that I not only bring law with me, but I bring a whole body of work with me. I understand people. I get things done. I have moved our district forward. I have helped move the southeast portion of Davidson County forward. All of those experiences combined into one make my application unique, make me unique. I am strong, I am tough, I can get the job done.
Thank you, Councilman, and I'm quite sure you will get the job done. Thank you, sir.
Councilman Gilmore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair Schulman. I appreciate you. Councilmember Coleman, I have no doubt in my mind that you are qualified and you have integrity. What I do want you to speak more about, and this is just something that perhaps I'm concerned about, is that I heard you say earlier, you spoke about the bias. And we talked about the number, and I have no problem saying I've been to the general sessions a lot. I get tickets for parking. I get tickets for driving. And I say that because I want people to know the council members don't get a break. They make me wait 55 minutes, an hour, just like everybody else, just to come and say, come on up there. And I just want to know, I tell the judges my story, and they say, thank you, council lady, you still owe $45, go to the right. And I say, okay, thank you. So, but I guess the issue is sometimes I see persons down there that maybe can't advocate for themselves or don't have the money. And we talk about people of color. And I see a lot of people of color in the judicial system that are down there. And you said earlier that you know that there are a lot of black males down there, but you wouldn't let that sway you. However, I do think that there needs to be some type of acknowledgement or some type of programs. It's not that you're waiving it. I mean, because once you go down there, you have to pay a fee, whether they find you guilty or not guilty anyway, which I think is interesting. You still have to pay that fee. But what I am concerned about is just the treatment and how you would deal with that. Because there are it's just always so interesting to me. There are the disproportionate amount of people of color and just how long they have to wait. I mean, just waiting for hours sometimes to see a judge. And I want you to speak to how you would handle that, because I am sensitive to that and I don't have a problem saying it. And I think even if I were white, which I'm not, I'd still be sensitive to that, because it's just something that you just happen to notice, because there are just so many, and we only make up 28% of the population here in Nashville. But when you go to those courts, you see about 90% or more people of color, and a lot of them seem like they cannot afford, or they just don't understand the judicial process. Would you speak to how you would handle that?
Absolutely. And the numbers right now are rolling. But in our jail system now, 75% of the people over there are African American, male or female. 15% are white, and the other 15% or 10% are others, meaning Hispanic or some other race. What I meant then and what I mean now is that the rule of law is what it is. There are certain things you can do from a program standpoint, but when it comes to the rule of law, you must abide by the rule of law. I will try to establish programs that will help people, such as the bond issue, which is the Public Defender's Office is trying to do a good job in making sure that people who can't afford bond be bonded out. I think those programs are good. But what I will tell you are those are legislative intent issues. There's a difference between the judiciary, the legislative, and the executive branch of government. We here in the City Council are the legislative branch. We have to make the rule. Judges' hands are tied. You cannot make rules based on your emotion. People come to our courts from different counties around the United States, and we have to have a precedent being set. When you break a rule and you're found to be guilty, you're going to have to pay that price. Will we have programs to help you out? Yes, we'll come to the council. We'll make legislative change where that's necessary. But a judge cannot rule based on his emotion and make social reform from the bench. That is just not the way I see it. Do I feel sorry? Do I want to help the disproportionate African young men? Yes, but how I could help them is be an example by working with them in the community, showing them how I did it. That's how I help them, not by saying I'm going to let you off because we share the same thing. The rule of law is what I'll rule by every day and all day.
Sure. Councilor Gilmore.
So, yeah, I'm not asking that you break the law, but I just noticed that a lot of the infractions have to do with license.
Sure.
Tail lights.
Sure.
Things that we would consider minor infractions. And I think the things that the Public Defender's Office, Diener, has worked on a lot with, and also Glenn Funk, our general attorney as well. So I think those are the issues. Not that you're necessarily bending, but it just makes you wonder when people come and you hear that they got a ticket because the tent might have been too dark, and it's not. Sometimes they don't even have a measurement. It just kind of looked dark to the.
Right.
Those are things I'm talking about. Are the red.
Right.
The left light was out. I mean, versus just saying that I got it fixed. I know that I've been in some courts that just said, well, did you get it fixed? Okay, that's fine. And then I've been in others where the judges say, well, you still have to pay the fee. Those are the type of things I'm talking about. I'm not talking about people that are, what we consider, I guess, higher infractions. But I'm talking about things that you look like, we kind of maybe nickeling and diming our citizens to death.
Absolutely. And let me tell you something. The general session judge, he or she has the opportunity to craft remedies and to give people a chance to get things right. You do have that latitude. And I would be interested in all of those programs. But those are not programs that judges sponsor. The DA's office, they can do that because that's a DA's office, the public defender. But as a judge, you cannot put yourself in that place. Where there's leniency and where there's an opportunity to help people, we will do that in every case. But I wouldn't want to make the mistake because I share a skin color that will get you off. But I will invest in people. I will help people to the extent that I can. But to the extent that you're not in compliance with the law, I have to find a way to get you in compliance. If that means a little bit more time, if that means sending you to programs by extending your court time to be back. That's what I mean.
Thank you, Council Lady. Council Lady Dow.
Thank you. I just want to follow up on one of the statements that you made with regard to the judicial, legislative, and so forth about following the law, which, I have a lot of experience in General Sessions Court. And I'm going to ask you one question I asked the last person because it's important to me, is whether or not you believe that judges have an obligation to help the public understand what happens in the courtroom.
Absolutely, and I think Judge Higgins does one great job of doing that. At the beginning of court, he will announce to people what they're doing, what the process is, how long it takes, and things of that nature. I think it's very important to educate the public at the beginning and every opportunity, whether it's informed, whether it's going out to the community. It is very important because people are nervous. They don't know what's going to happen. They're unsure, and they could be faced with some horrific time that they have to give up their life and make provisions, such as DUI and things of that nature. It is very important to educate people. And being a former instructor, I do have those skill sets. I think I have the skill sets that communicate with people to help them understand both pros and cons, and also the impact of due process, procedural due process as well as substance. The reason substance due process is important is because you need to be fair. Procedure means you need to be in court when you need to be there. Now, will we help you out when you get to court? Yes, but you need to be there.
I appreciate you saying that. The other thing is when you were talking about the different, I'm going to apply the law equally, which I would, expect a judge to do to some extent. But when you see, I'm just wondering, do you feel if a judge has an obligation, I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this, but do you think judges have an obligation, like if you're sitting on the bench and you see some type of legal or judicial issue that's maybe that the legislature have set up, do you feel like you have an obligation to inform them of these legal issues? For example, here's an example. The state does not issue driver's license to people who are not citizens, I guess. And so the police stop them, give them a citation for driving without a license. They come to the courtroom, and I see this often. They sentence them to driving school. I mean, they're going to get out, they're going to drive again, they have no license. So when I see things like that, do you feel any type of obligation or responsibility to work with legislative bodies to inform them what's going on in the system, to see how these laws impact your ability to apply them to people, and where there are some laws that, I don't want to say not just, but some laws that need to change, because you're seeing, I come in here, they don't have a license, they're not going to have a license, I'm sending them back out after driving school, that working with these legislative bodies in order to, change the law.
Right. And every judiciary system has a lobbyist that they send to the Hill or send to the council. And whenever we catch a situation where people are being affected in gross numbers and there are things we can do to get that, we need to lobby the council, we need to lobby the state legislature and perhaps the federal government in some cases. What I'm saying is that I won't be making laws just on my emotion. What I need to do is get the legislative to change those bodies, get them to offer money for programs that will help people. But again, from the bench, I have a strict construction of the law with as much discretion as I can, but not to the extent that I think because we share something in common, I should give someone a break. That's not right.
All right. Councilor Dowell, any other questions?
I'm sorry, I don't have any more questions. I appreciate you answering. You did a great job. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, no one else in the queue? Believe that's it. Mr. Coleman, thank you very much for being here. And
thank you.
You can either stay or you can head home. But
well,
thank you very much.
I'll head home. Thank you. And I'm asking each and every one of you for your vote. Thank you.
Mr. Dredd is next. Mr. Dredd, welcome. All right there. So, members of the council, Adam Dredd. Mr. Dredd, I have a couple of questions for you to start with, yes, and then we're going to ask you to take 2 to 3 minutes to introduce yourselves to the council. So first, licensed to practice law by the Supreme Court of Tennessee for at least 5 years.
Yes, sir.
All right. And have you been a resident of Nashville, Davidson County for at least 5 years?
I have since 1981.
All right. And are you, you're not less than 30 or more than 65 years of age?
I wish the earlier, no.
All right. And I will also indicate again that Mr. Dredd filed timely and appropriate question and resume as required pursuant to Rule 44. All right. So, Mr. Dredd, 2 to 3 minutes to introduce yourself to the council.
All right. Thank you, council members, for being here tonight. My name is Adam Dredd. I've been practicing law in Davidson County since 2004. When I passed the bar, I went to law school at 37 years old at the Nashville School of Law. I ran for this seat while I was on the council. I was elected as an at-large in 2002 and again in 2003. On the council, I was chairman of Public Safety and Regulated Beverages, as well as the Convention and Tourism Committee. In law school, I was a public defender intern, and prior to the council, I was also on the beer board, which is kind of a prosecutorial board. So I've been both a prosecutor and a defender in a public stance. I've had a varied career. I've done a lot in the entertainment industry. I actually came out of the entertainment industry. I was a stand-up comedian in the 80s when I was a touring road comic, and then I became a morning drive radio host here in Nashville, and then I went to work for Dick Clark, where I was his feature producer at the Nashville Network. Been a spokesman for various companies, including Fruit of the Loom and Jack Daniels. And I've written 3 books, lots of columns for different magazines and newspapers, published a few songs, and had a pretty varied career. I did run for a judge seat for Division 9, I believe, in 2014. I was unsuccessful, but over 25,000 Davidson County residents did vote for me at that time. I am very interested in serving in this seat in Division 10. I've been in that courtroom for years and years, probably at least once a week, if not more. I would like to bring integrity back to that seat. I understand it's going to change a little bit. Right now it is primarily DUI court as well as drug court. I do have a background with the drug court. I did raise a lot of their money for them in 2011, and I rolled off that board shortly after that. I believe in the mission of that, and if that does become one of the responsibilities of Division 10 again, I'd be very interested in pursuing that as well. I've done a lot of civil law as well, and if it does roll back into partially civil law, I do represent a lot of clients in the construction industries as well as homeowners and rental kind of litigation in Nashville. I've had a few big cases. I was involved in the poison pet food case against Menu Foods in China. It's one of my major ones, and I was successful, albeit short time, but we did successfully beat the state for passing a law allowing guns in bars, which I still think is one of the craziest laws ever passed in the world, but they did manage to change that law a little bit and get that back on the books. I am open for any questions any of y'all might have. Happy to be here.
Council Lady Murphy.
Thank you, and welcome to our hot seat in the chamber.
Thank you.
I noticed that you left out that your position with the hooligans on your resume. I didn't know if you wanted to. I'm kidding.
It's a secret.
I'm kidding. And so I think you already said that you will plan on seeking this seat whether you're appointed or not.
No, oh, I'm sorry. No, I will not. I'm not going to run for this seat. My goal is only to serve out this term and fill the rest of Casey Moreland's seat. I have no intention of running, and I'll testify to that right now. I think somebody needs to get in there right now and get that courtroom up and running again without the added burden of having to run a countywide race almost immediately into it, because that'll be next August, and that's not a lot of time to mount and be successful and do all those jobs successfully. So my mission is, I'm here for the job. I'm not here to be a career judge. I just want to fill this seat, albeit temporarily, and move on. I plan on keeping my office space, hopefully subletting it, and going back to private practice immediately after the citizens of Nashville elect somebody to be that judge.
Great, thank you. As I've asked the other candidates tonight, if you could speak a little bit to the roles of the specialty courts. I saw that you were a founding member with the Drug Court Foundation and what the role is, and would you look to take that over during your time on the court?
If that is available, I would like to take that back over. Again, I believe wholeheartedly in the mission, and actually a lot of my clients, we do put through drug court and also different types of recovery treatments. A lot of folks, again, I plan on following the law to the way it's written, but I think a lot of folks do deserve a second chance, and if we can help them and help rehabilitate them, I think it does a lot better for the world in general if we can do that, and the drug court is certainly one of those avenues we've been able to use for that very successfully until recently, unfortunately.
Thank you and best of luck.
Thank you.
Councilman Mendez?
Hey, thanks for being here. Are you still involved with the Drug Court Foundation?
I'm not. I rolled off the board, I believe, in 2012. I hosted the big fundraiser to get this, even though it started prior to then, they really didn't have any money. So I was involved in fundraising for that in 2011, and that was pretty much my primary role. I didn't work much in the day-to-day other than having clients sometimes involved with it.
Gotcha. Since you're familiar with it, if you get the appointment, is there anything that you think should be changed about the relationship between the drug court and the foundation?
Well, I think it definitely needs to be revitalized in a lot of different ways. In terms of the foundation, the court itself, I didn't agree with some of the choices that were made early on and some of the people that staffed it. And I think that should probably be looked at a little more closely. Some of the relationships might have been a little too close, and some of them, I think there may be some more qualified folks who could help out in that area.
I guess I'll let you off the hook and not ask the follow-up unless you want to share about what positions you're talking about.
I don't think and again, I'd like to give everybody a chance, but I'm telling you from my experience back then and some of the things that I've witnessed, I'd give folks a chance to fix things, or else we'll get some other folks to do things.
All right, thanks. No more further questions.
All right. Thank you, Council Member. Council Lady Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, Mr. Dredd.
Hello, Councilor.
We understand, so you will be, if you are appointed, you'll be serving a limited 18 months.
Yes.
And so within that limited time, one, I'm interested in your observation of current General Sessions Court. Is it running smoothly, or if it's not, how would you be planning to improve? And so I'm interested in your role and, the observation of the current court.
I'm going to give you a very politically incorrect answer. Casey Moreland actually ran a very, very efficient court, meaning in times of the DAs and the defenders working together and folks coming in as witnesses or victims, it was one of the most efficiently moving courtrooms with a huge caseload, and I would like to get that back and going. That did seem to work very well. The other problems are something to the side. So my goal would be to get the efficiency back in there so people don't have to miss work, so people could get on with the rest of their lives. And so, yes, I think I would like to restore it back to that angle of it.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yes.
One more question is, I asked the other candidate, what is your feeling or thoughts about criminal justice system? Do you think some people deserve to be in jail?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Could you elaborate?
Do I believe some people deserve to be in jail? Absolutely. I believe if people break the law, and jail is the appropriate punishment. Now, that is separate from drug court. Sometimes people are nonviolent offenses, and it's primarily based on some sort of addiction or disease, then they may not necessarily need jail. That might not be the right thing to get them on the right track again, and for society. But yes, certain people should obviously, yes, be put in jail for crimes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Council Lady. Councilman Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Never waste an opportunity to learn something. What disclosure is required of judges? I guess the question about the foundation and the current status of the courthouse raises this. Is there a disclosure requirement for judges?
I don't know about disclosure outside of listing what your bio and your resume are in terms of now
financial disclosure ongoing.
Financial disclosure?
Once you are a judge, do you have to disclose?
I don't know the answer to that, but I'm thinking not. I think you just file your taxes like anyone else, unless you have some interest in some not-for-profit or something that is involved in there.
But that, and perhaps our distinguished chairman might know, is that just nobody does that in the courthouse because You know,
I mean, I'm not actually sure. I'm looking at Councilman Mendez. I know that obviously if there's conflicts of interest, judges can recuse themselves. Councilman Mendez?
So for an elected position, they've got the same annual disclosure that we file with the state, which isn't very detailed. And then beyond that, there's the Tennessee rules of judicial conduct that lay out when the judge has a conflict and they're supposed to identify it and let the parties know. Beyond that, I don't believe there's anything that gets filed or reported by judges. They're left under the rules of judicial conduct to identify when there's a conflict, or if a party brings it up to decide yes or no that they've got a conflict.
Right. Thank you. Mr. Dredd?
May I go back to Councilman Mendez's question again, and it caught me a little bit off guard on the Drug Court Foundation and the separation. As you know, in the charity world, I've worked with a lot of charities, with a lot of you in here, and I can raise money. I'm a pretty good fundraiser, and I kind of want to go that angle again, back with the Drug Court, get money back up there to run programs, but also build a strong board again who can make more of those decisions. I really don't think that's the sole decision of the judge in those matters. That clarified it a little better.
Councilman Hastings, any questions? You had pushed the button.
No, that was, they already
Okay. All right, thank you. No one else in the queue? Mr. Dredd, thank you for being here. And you can either stay or you can head home.
Can I make one last comment?
You can make one last comment.
In addition to me not wanting, that I'm not going to run in 2018, I don't think that Casey Moreland staff, to the best of my knowledge, were aware of anything going on at the time, and I see no reason that those people should lose their jobs. A lot of times when new judges come in, they bring in new people, and I would keep the same Metro employees working today throughout my time if they choose to stay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. Next candidate, Ana Escobar. It's important work. So I would commend the Rules Committee and the rest of the council for staying here and asking these questions, because this is going to be an important vote. Ms. Escobar, please have a seat.
My old seat.
Your old seat?
And there are no new messages from the mayor.
So, Ms. Escobar, welcome. A couple of questions to start with, and then I'll give you 2 or 3 minutes to introduce yourself to the council. One, have you been licensed to practice law by the Supreme Court of Tennessee for at least 5 years?
I have.
Okay. And have you been a resident of Davidson County, Nashville, Davidson County, for at least 5 years?
I have.
And are you not less than 30 or more than 65 years of age?
I am.
All right, thank you. Also indicate again, Ms. Escobar, as a candidate, filed timely and appropriate questionnaire and resume with the clerk's office. All right, so Ms. Escobar, I give you 2 to 3 minutes to say whatever you'd like to.
My name is Ana Escobar. I was born in Bogota, Colombia. I came here when I was 6 months old, and I've lived in Nashville for the majority of my life. I went to St. Cecilia, Vanderbilt University for college, and then George Washington Law School. I'm divorced. I've got a 10-year-old son that I'm raising and 2 grown stepkids. I've been a lawyer for 22 years. I've been a public defender, a private attorney, and I'm currently a district attorney. I've been a contract attorney with a civil law firm here in town, Neal & Harwell. I've been Metro Clerk, and I was also the Deputy Director of the Administrative Office of the Courts. Currently, I'm the team leader for domestic violence in the District Attorney's Office. I've practiced in federal court, criminal court, circuit court, general sessions courts throughout Middle Tennessee. I've done some administrative law in front of the Civil Service Commission. I believe in public service. I was part of the Tennessee Judicial Nominating Commission. I've been on the Board of Equalization, the Planning Commission, and the Election Commission. I've tried to maintain work on boards of nonprofits such as the YWCA, the Nashville Prevention Partnership, the Junior League of Nashville, and the Nashville Bar Association. and I'm here to apply for this position.
So thank you. All right, so we now are going to open up the floor for questions. Council Lady Murphy.
Thank you, Chairman. Welcome back, Anna.
Thank you.
Do you think that wrangling all of us has really prepared you? No, I'm kidding. This is something I know it's in our questionnaire, but I've asked everyone just for our folks at home. If you receive this nomination or if you don't, will you still be planning on running for the position?
I'm strongly considering it, yes.
Okay. And obviously the previous judge had oversaw some of the specialty courts.
Yes.
How do you feel about the role of specialty courts, and would you like to take that specific specialty court over?
It's my understanding that Judge Robinson is now dealing with the drug court and Judge Turner has cherished hearts. I do believe in specialty courts. I've studied the issues of human trafficking in my career, and so I do believe that there is a place for it. I also see the effects of drug addiction with both victims and defendants and see how it kind of can destroy families and lives. So I do believe there is a place in that. And so if the team of General Sessions judges would like to bring it back to Division 10, I would gladly accept it.
Great. Thank you and best of luck.
Thank you.
Thank you, Council Lady Murphy. Councilman Mendez.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Two-part question. Can you describe what you think the qualities of a successful judge are? And then as part of that answer, the second part is to get into the weeds about what are the practical things in a courtroom that make a judge do a good job?
Okay. I believe that a judge should be, well, a judge really presents the demeanor in the tone of a court. One of my favorite judges is Todd Campbell from federal court, and what I love about him is that he expects everyone to do their best. So everyone is ready, prepared. He's not rude about it. He's not mean about it. He's not a bully about it. He expects you to do your best, so you bring your best. So I think a judge that sets that tone for a court brings out the best in everyone who participates in it. Obviously, somebody needs to be impartial. They need to be a good listener, an active listener, not somebody who's distracted by their cell phone or the computer or what's going on or wanting to rush things. So somebody who's listening. You know, when people go to court, there's going to be a winner and there's going to be a loser, and somebody's going to be unhappy. But the important thing for people coming into that courtroom is to feel like they were heard, that they had their day in court, that they weren't rushed, that they were treated fairly. So I believe that a judge should treat everyone equally, whether they're homeless or a millionaire, they get the same treatment. As for the practicalities of being a General Sessions judge, I think you have to work hard. I believe I do have that work ethic that I could bring to the position. I think you have to, come to court on time, start court on time, be cognizant of being available so that case can get disposed of. And I think that a judge needs to hold court. Unfortunately, sometimes court days get canceled, so that puts things back and back and back, so people aren't getting their day in court quickly enough. So, as I said, active listening, being in court on time, being there available to the attorneys and the parties, and being impartial and showing respect for everyone.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Council Lady Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, Ms. Escobar.
Good evening.
Obviously, you have observed the General Sessions Court quite a few times.
Yes, ma'am.
What is your observation? Is it running quite well? Or if it's not, what is your idea of improving it?
Well, I will be honest with you. I think last week I was in court, in the court that we're talking about, Division 10, that's currently in courtroom 4D. I think they told me they had 100 people there for court, and the line from the door of 4D went all the way to 4B. And frankly, it was almost like a cattle call, like it was just people getting processed through. And so I think there needs to be more time dedicated to the individual cases and the individual people. General Sessions Court is about real people, real people that come there with their problems, whether they're a victim, a defendant, a civil petitioner or respondent. They're there, they're real problems, and they don't need to be just cycled through a process.
Thank you. One more question I've been asking another candidate is your thoughts on the criminal justice system. Do you think some people or people deserve to be in jail?
I believe it's a case-by-case basis, obviously, and I kind of make that analysis in my job now. I look at the facts, I look at how strongly the case is, I look at their criminal history to see if they've had an opportunity on probation. And if the situation warrants it, then yes, jail time can be appropriate.
Thank you.
Thank you, Council Lady. Council Lady Haywood.
Thank you. As a prospective judge, what area do you feel like you're the strongest in, and what area do you feel like that you're not so strong in?
In terms of subject matter?
Overall.
Okay. Well, in my 22 years, I primarily have practiced criminal law, so I believe my strength is in that. Like I said, I'm currently doing domestic violence. I've been doing that for 2 years. In my private practice, I primarily handle drug cases, so I believe I'm familiar with search and seizure law kind of thing. I have only handled a handful of civil cases. Now, I've worked on class actions. When I was working at Neal and Harwell, I worked on the Bridgestone-Firestone litigation. That took us to federal court. I also worked on an employment dispute over money that also took us to federal court. I've done a handful of landlord-tenant things, and I did file a couple of divorces, which wouldn't be appropriate in general sessions. But so I think my strength is criminal law. I have practiced in civil law, but if I were to be selected for this position, I promise you that I would be a student of the law as I am now, and I would stay, educate myself and keep abreast of the law and make sure that I knew about everything that was changing, the new laws that the legislature were to pass, the new case law that came out.
Okay, and I guess I am talking about this particular assignment that you're seeking. What do you think you would bring to this assignment that would be above the rest?
I believe that because I've done both sides of a criminal case, I've been a public defender, so I know what it takes and what it's like to represent people who are indigent, who have their priorities are different, their concerns are different. I've represented people as a private attorney. I've seen what a conviction can do to someone's life. I've seen how delaying a case can really impact somebody's future because they can't kind of move past this. As a district attorney, I've seen how hard it is to come to court and accuse somebody of something. I've seen police officers who have worked a shift all night and then have to come to court at 8 a.m. and sit through that just so that they can go to court that next night. So I've seen different perspectives. So I believe that my diversity would allow me to understand where everyone is coming from and be able to be more fair and impartial and run it in a more judicious way.
One last question. At this time in your life, and maybe what moved you to seek this particular position? If there's one single thing that has moved you in this direction, what would it be?
I think that just having seen how the whole system has been tarnished by this experience, there are a lot of people in this system that work very hard at their jobs and do a good job. And this whole process has kind of brought that, brought the whole system to shame. So I'd like to help restore the dignity to that position, to the justice system, to show transparency, to show that impartiality, and that perhaps the good old boy system isn't really present anymore. I don't have any connections. I'm not part of the good old boy system. So I come with a pure heart to want to try to fix this, make it better, because there are people in the system that work very hard and do their very best. And unfortunately, we've all been tarnished with this.
And obviously, you're not part of the good old girl system either.
Yeah.
No, I'll just throw a little humor there. Thank you very much.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate
Thank
your
you.
answers.
Good counsel lady. Councilman Leonardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. General Escobar, thanks for being here. Appreciate it. And I want this body to know that when I've dealt with you since you've been a district attorney, you don't look down on defense attorneys. You treat everyone with respect, and it's a pleasurable interaction with you from a defense attorney, DA perspective. And so that's very important, especially in what I do. And so, and I think Council Lady Haywood took my question about your experiences. You have lots of varied experience. I think that's a very helpful thing. But the one question I've asked the other candidates, and I'll ask you the same, is if you do get the appointment, and this may be a hard thing to answer given your current job, but you know, if all of a sudden you just become the presiding judge of Davidson County General Sessions Court overnight, and you could wave a magic wand, you wouldn't get any pushback or anything, what would be the first thing or the one thing that you would change about how our Davidson County General Sessions Court run?
I think it would be, obviously I don't know the logistics of everything, but I just feel that it takes so long to get a court date currently under the way things are being run. And, you know, evidence is lost. People can't move on with their lives. Victims are, you know, panicked and waiting on this big court date that's looming ahead. So I think what would be great is if we could reduce the time for cases to be put off so that you could have your day in court a lot faster. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Pulley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Escobar, for appearing before us and answering our questions.
Thank you.
You've answered a lot of them already. I do want to go back to your experience, and when I look at your resume, it's a wide variety of things, and I can't really tell by looking at it how much time really have you spent in the courtroom when you put all these positions together?
I think if you just subtract 5 years from 22, it'd be 17 years.
And you spend a lot of time in all those positions in the courtroom?
Yes, sir.
Not just supervising others who go in the courtroom and try cases?
Correct.
All right, you're working for the DA's office right now.
Yes, sir.
And I know you've worked for the public defender's office as well.
Yes, sir.
What can you do to assure us that you're not like another prosecutor going on the bench?
I think, you know, the majority of my experience has been as a defense attorney, so I believe that I am able to critique a case as a defense attorney would, to see the holes in it. And I kind of, like I said earlier, I kind of perform that analysis now as a prosecutor. I look at cases through a defense perspective. What can I prove? What's the strength of the case? What's the strength of the witnesses? Does the evidence meet each element of the charge? Then you balance, the person's, criminal history and what, the circumstances. So I believe even in my current job, I am able to analyze a case in an impartial and fair way while being an advocate. I know that sounds a little...
No, I hear it. You did speak to your work ethic, and that leads me to my next question about the bench and power, integrity, and these kinds of things, which is why we're ended up here today.
Right.
Quite clearly, there's going to be a high mark around integrity, character, and ethics as it relates to this position because of the breaches that have occurred.
Yes,
and
sir.
we've all seen there's very little accountability to judges. And when you ascend to that position, there's an incredible amount of power that's given to you to rule and really influence an awful lot of things. And I want you to speak to what it is that you bring to this office and what are you going to do to keep your character and integrity in check? Do you have any kind of accountability mechanism that you're going to employ or just speak to that issue because it's very important in this nomination and the election that follows?
Yes. Well, I believe that this position is not about me or the person that gets put into that position. It's about serving the citizens of Davidson County. And frankly, I have such a guilty conscience. If I thought I was not doing my job, it wouldn't sit well with me. I have too much of a guilty conscience. So I think it's about accountability to the citizens. As you put it very well, the citizens have kind of been betrayed by this situation. And so whoever is appointed to this position is going to have to work very hard to regain that trust from everyone. And so that can be seen by work ethic, by listening, by, not canceling court, by, being present. Even though you're there, you need to also be present and, like I said, be an active listener. So I think all those things combined would show the public that the person that has been appointed truly is trying to restore the dignity of that court.
Thank you. And then my last question deals with bias. I've experienced this in the 35 years I've appeared in court before judges, and I've seen that many judges are biased toward different attorneys. And we all maybe have some innate bias in us, and I'd like to hear your comments about how you'll keep that out of your courtroom.
I think that I have developed a professional maturity. I think that I know that, this is a job, and I don't take it personally. People represent their clients against me in a zealous manner. I represent the state in a zealous manner, but it is not personal, and there's nothing to be gained personally from it. We're doing a job, and as long as everyone's being professional, I think that will be maintained.
So if I don't support you and I support someone else and end up in your court, you're not going to take it out on me?
No, sir. Absolutely not.
All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate you subjecting yourself to this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Hastings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, for coming. And I'm going to ask the same question I've asked everyone, and I know you're in the hot seat, but it's been a pleasure meeting you before today and all the other times, and to hear a little bit about your background and what you have done. You have such a pleasant attitude and demeanor about yourself. You're really warm to be around. So I would like to just make mention of that.
Thank you.
All right?
I appreciate it.
All right. My question is, what makes you different from the rest of the candidates? That special mark about you that is going to make this seat, this individual seat, work in such a way that we have never seen before?
Well, go ahead. I'm sorry. I think, as what I said before, unfortunately, sometimes court can be like a cattle call, like just processing people through. And I think, to speak to what you said about me, I hope that I have connections with people, and it's very important for me as an attorney to make sure that people who are going through the system understand what they're going through. And so it's very important to me that you're almost, as a DA, you're shepherding these people through this process, that they're educated, that they know what's going on and what's happening to them, because it is their case. So I believe that I bring mindfulness to this. I am mindful of the way a victim or a defendant is perceived within the system, and what their questions may be, and their doubts. I also think that I bring some cultural competency that may not have been there before. I think that with my background as an immigrant and working with immigrants and being Hispanic would help me kind of educate the bench on differences in cultures, and to be, a little more open-minded about that. As I said before, I've been there for, practiced law for 22 years. 17 has been in the actual courtroom. I've been in courtrooms all across Middle Tennessee, so I've seen what an unfair judge can do, and the damage that can happen through that. So I think that having seen that variety of experiences, I know what kind of judge I want to be. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Would like to thank you for being honest. And if that candidate is you, I know we will have a meek demeanor overall. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Council Lady Gilmore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You're oh so good. You're one of the best chairs I know.
Why, thank you.
Yes. Ms. Escobar, thank you for being here this afternoon. I wanted you to speak a little bit more to your opening remarks when you said someone asked you, would you be running for this position? And you said you're considering it.
Yes.
So if you could just speak to why you would not definitely run for this position if you were pursuing it and we were to give our votes to you as a council, but why you may consider actually running for the office versus just saying that you would definitely running.
As if I were lucky enough to get the position, I would definitely run. I had anticipated running in 2022. This has been a surprise to all of us that this would be available in 2018. Frankly, it's a financial decision. I am a single mom. I need to, if I were to run, I'd have to not work at the DA's office for some months, and I'd have to save some money. So it's just a practical financial situation that I have.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Council Lady. Councilman Mendez.
I just want to make sure I understood that right. If you get appointed by us, you're definitely 100% running?
Absolutely.
All right, thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Councilman. Nobody else in the queue? Ms. Escobar, thank you very much for being here and taking all the questions. And you are welcome to stay, or you are welcome to go home. It's now 7:30. All right, ladies and gentlemen of the council, I need to announce that Mr. Barry Guerin has withdrawn his name from contention. He did come tonight, and he asked me whether he needed to stay and personally announce it. He did file everything timely. He did qualify, but he came tonight just to let us know that he had withdrawn his name. So he is no longer a candidate, so we only have 7 candidates. Martisa Johnson is the next person. Ms. Johnson, welcome. If you will have a seat right up here in the front. There you go. So welcome. Just a couple of questions before we start, and then we'll give you a couple minutes to introduce yourself, the council. Okay. First, are you licensed to practice law by the Supreme Court of Tennessee for at least 5 years?
Yes.
Okay. Have you been a resident of Nashville, Davidson County for at least 5 years?
Yes.
And are you not less than 30 or more than 65 years of age?
I fit within that window.
Okay, thank you. I think that's a good answer. All right, and I'll also say again that you timely filed your appropriate questionnaire and your resume pursuant to Rule 44 of the council rules. So I'm going to give you 2 or 3 minutes to address the council, and then we're going to turn it over to questions. All right?
Thank you so much for this opportunity. The late Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm is credited with saying, "Service is the rent we pay for the privilege of living on this earth." My passion for service has been a driving force in my life long before I became a lawyer, and is one of the reasons that I sit before you today. Every day for almost 9 years, I have used my passion to advocate for a system that is fair to all people, a system that is equal regardless of people's race, education, or economic backgrounds. In my career, I have educated college and law students to love the law and seek justice. I have encouraged community members to be active and engaged in the judicial system. I have practiced in every general sessions court, treatment court, and criminal court in the courthouse, and I am knowledgeable about the issues facing the justice system today. When you see me, Martisa Johnson, you see a person who is truly dedicated to justice and equality, a passionate people person. I can assure you that my experience has equipped me with the tools that would make me able to immediately restore the integrity of the court and preside without bias or preconceived notions. I am the daughter of a strong single mother who brought me up right here in the streets and schools in this city. And through her struggles to provide for our family, she taught me to work hard and respect all people. Those are principles that I have taken with me every day of my life. The council's vote to appoint me to replace or to fill the vacancy in Division 10 would be a vote for all people. And I can tell you that I would be truly honored to serve in this capacity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Johnson. All right. Councilman Mendez.
Good evening. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
You spoke to passion in your opening comments, which I appreciate. I mean, you've struck me as extremely passionate, and I think it would be great in the job. The other thing that through Bar Association things I know about your involvement in leadership programs. Could you take a moment to talk about how you would apply both passion and leadership in the day-to-day job of being a General Sessions judge?
Sure. I believe that the critical, essential piece to being a judge is being passionate. You have to be passionate about the justice system. You have to have compassion for the people who are going to be coming in and out of the court system every day. So my passion for doing this, my passion for people, would certainly help me to be able to preside with fairness, with impartiality, but most importantly, with compassion for the folks who are coming in the courtroom. This is something that will affect their lives forever. And so having passion for the job is critical to that. As to leadership, I think that the things that I have learned in both the NBA leadership program and other leadership classes that I'm a part of give me the ability to sort of become a voice that is different, offer a more diverse perspective for someone who can't just say, I've worked in the system, but I can also say that I've lived in the system, that I grew up in this city, that this is my home, and that these streets, that courthouse, everything about Nashville is me. And I really respect that, and I'm here to do that. So I think that being able to be a voice for leadership, maybe I can sort of poke and prod the judges who have been around for a while.
Thanks. And then one more question, if it's all right with you,
Sure.
Mr. Chair. So that was a big picture question. Let me ask sort of a closer to the ground question. What are some of the practical things that you see in a courtroom that make certain judges good at what they do and other courtrooms maybe not run so well? What are the good things that you would like to emulate?
I would like to emulate patience. I would like to emulate dedication to the people and the dockets that are happening in the courthouse. I would like to emulate a certain type of efficiency. There's a type of efficiency that just wants to be done quickly. I want things to be efficient, but I want them to be running proper and making sure that the system is fair and equal for everyone. Some things that I think that I would like to personally see done different. I think there is a huge opportunity for the judicial body to educate the people who are coming in and out of the courthouse about what they are about to get into. I'm not saying practice law. I'm not saying advise people about the law, because as a judge you can't do that. But we are missing a part of the system that educates people about what's about to happen. When you walk into that courthouse, you're about to change your life, for one way or the other, whichever side you are on. And you should be prepared and educated about what is going to happen. And I think that a part of the system has neglected the education for more of an efficient model.
Thanks. Really appreciate it, and good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Council Lady Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, Ms. Johnson. Thank you for being here. You have, in your career, observed a general session courtroom quite more than few occasions. So what is your observation? Is it running smoothly? And if it's not, how are you plan to improve the courtroom?
General Sessions Court is a very high volume place. So running smoothly is oftentimes difficult by the sheer volume of people that are coming in and out, the different types of cases, the different types of dockets that are running all at the same time. So again, one of the things that I think immediately needs to happen is to change from a model of just making sure we're doing efficient things to run the docket and making sure that we are taking the time to focus on each of these individual cases and the people who are coming in the court system. I do think from the moment you walk into the door at the courthouse, we are lacking in areas of educating people about what's about to happen. And I plan to certainly do that on any docket that I would be presiding over.
Thank you. Follow-up question is, what is your thought in general about criminal justice system? Do you think people deserve to be in jail?
That's an interesting question. I think certainly there are offenses that if you are convicted of that offense, then jail is the appropriate sentence. But I do think that it takes the process itself to run its course before we get to that place. I don't think we can start off by saying just because a person is charged with a specific offense, they deserve jail. I think that for the system to work as it's supposed to, then we have to go through every channel. And a jury or a judge, if you decide to have a bench trial, decides guilt or innocence. And then in certain areas, I do believe that incarceration is appropriate. There are so many cases, though, where alternative sentencing other than incarceration are appropriate. And if we started to adopt more alternative sentences in areas where they are appropriate and less incarceration, I think we could eliminate some of the problems as a whole with the justice system.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the answer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Council Lady. Councilman Pulley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Johnson, for appearing before us. I have a couple of questions, and I'll start with your experience. For no more years than you've been in the workforce, you've compiled quite an impressive resume. You've been, is it the last 8 years with the Public Defender's Office? Is that correct?
A little over 8, closer to 9 now.
Closer to 9?
Yes.
Is that the extent of your law experience as a practitioner?
As a licensed attorney, yes, I've spent my entire career at the Public Defender's Office. I did do clinical attorney work at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville's legal clinic, where I practiced juvenile, civil, and employment law. And I also did an internship with both legal aid and the district attorney's office in Memphis, Tennessee.
Thank you very much. And we all know that as an assistant public defender, you spend quite a lot of time in General Sessions Court. Is that accurate?
Yes.
And can you give us any assurances that you are not just another defense lawyer rising to the bench?
Sure. I could say I don't think there are a lot of defense lawyers that are on the bench, but I can assure you that I would not be a defense lawyer just sitting on the bench. Just because I have chosen to be a public defender, this area of law truly spoke to me as a person. But I didn't abandon my citizen hat. I didn't abandon knowing that there are victims of crime in Nashville and that police have hard work that they have to do, and that in order for the system to work efficiently, all of these parts play a part together. So I've been a public defender. I've also, my family, been a victim of crime. I've also had to encounter the police to help me. So I know the system from all angles, and so no, I think I could be absolutely fair and not partial to the defense bar.
Thank you. One of the most important things about this election is it's clouded by the lack of integrity from your supposed predecessor. So it's very important that integrity, character, and ethics surrounds the person who we nominate. There's very little accountability held to judges in that position, and there's an awful lot of power bestowed upon you when you ascend to that position. I want you to speak to how you plan on handling that position and that power, and what kind of accountability you have in your life to keep you true to your ethics, character, and your integrity.
I can say to you, Councilman Pulley, that this position would not be about me, the person. It's about the people who I have serviced for so long in my life, but also the ones that would be coming in to my courtroom while I'm there. So I don't see this position as elevating me, the person, to judge. I see it as giving me a continued opportunity to serve. And because of that, I am accountable to all the people that I'd be serving. I'm accountable to my family members. You've at this point heard me speak about being from Nashville. My entire community base, family base, everybody who I hold dear is here in Nashville, and they are not soft-spoken. They would keep me accountable. I have developed relationships with leaders in the bar through my NBA leadership class and other classes of people who have gone before me in this journey of being a lawyer. And I think that my support system, my family, the people that care about me and I care about would hold me accountable for everything.
Thank you. One other question we have. In my 35 years experience appearing before courts, I've noticed that there are judges who clearly have bias toward individuals and individual attorneys to the extent that some attorneys will recuse themselves from cases in their courtroom because of that bias. I'd like for you to address any kind of innate bias you have and how you plan on keeping that out of your courtroom.
I don't have the type of relationships with anyone that would keep me from doing the job of being a fair and impartial judge. I don't have any relationships at all that would make me even concerned about that type of bias. I have to work with every agency that offers services to the court system, all of the players and parties involved. I have been the same person that I am at the public defender's office, with my colleagues at the DA's office, with the people that I present my cases in front of. And my reputation is for being fair, respectable, and I'm a strong advocate. And I plan to continue to do those things without bias.
Thank you very much. I have no further questions. I'll just state that regardless of the outcome of this process, you have a very impressive presence about you, and I think you have a bright future. Thank you for coming before us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilor Haywood.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for coming before us today, and I have to echo the words of Council Member Pulley. You're extremely, extremely impressive, and your confidence is quite overwhelming. Yeah. My question is, being a young lady raised by a single parent and being an African American, what gave birth to you even pursuing the field of becoming a lawyer?
Wow. Nothing that I have ever had in my life came easy. It was always by working for it. I could tell you that as a middle school student, I would not see myself on the path that I am on now because I was dejected. I was not invested in school. I could care less about what was happening in the world as a whole. And I told my mom that, and I can really tell you all that what you see in me is because of the woman who raised me. And when I told her that I was unhappy as a student and that I really didn't care about education or the world, she sort of switched on a different gear. She got me involved in the Upward Bound program with Tennessee State University. She got me involved with mentors and people who came into my life and provided me a lot of structure. They saw things in me that I didn't see at the time, and they pushed me to be the person that I am right now. So I sit here because of all the people who invested in me and gave me a chance, spoke great things into me. And so that motivating force, knowing all the opportunities I've been afforded, all the people who've done great things for me, I knew that my career, my life was going to be invested in service to other people because I want somebody who has a similar background to me or who doesn't to see me, to see the things that I've accomplished, to know that nothing was easy for me. And they can be motivated that they too can have this life. So I've been afforded really great opportunities that are rooted in what my mom did to sacrifice for me.
A wonderful answer. What unique qualities, if there's maybe one or two, and I think I could probably answer this question, but what unique qualities do you feel like you would bring to this particular position?
I think I bring a different perspective. I think I bring a realness to this that I'm not saying doesn't exist, because I think and I hope that the judges who are over there now are practicing out of a real life commitment to justice. But I bring a realness that this is everything to me. This whole journey that I'm on, this passion for justice, this desire to be a judge is really real for me. And it's not about me, it's about what I want to do for Nashville, what I want to do for my community. And so I think that because I'm such an outspoken person about that, I bring a different perspective to the bench and to the justice system as a whole.
Okay, one last thing. In terms of this position, and after reviewing your resume, which is extremely impressive, extremely impressive, if there is an area that you're not as strong in, what would that area be?
I would say that I am not as strong in the civil practice as I am in the criminal practice. My clients, their worlds are often deeply entrenched in a lot of things. So they often don't just have a criminal problem, they have civil issues and juvenile issues and life issues. So I advise them in all of these areas, and I can navigate my way through the civil system and other systems. But my direct practice has, for the majority, been in the criminal world. So I'm not as strong in civil, but I know the law and I could practice in that area too.
So what would be your game plan to strengthen yourself in that particular area?
Immersing myself in the study of civil law. I know what it's rooted in. I know it's a different burden of proof. It requires a different standard. People are looking for a money. They want to be made whole by money versus in the criminal system, there's a different world. So I would just be knowledgeable about the law, which is something that I've strived to do my entire career.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Council Lady. Council Lady Hastings.
Making me sweat.
Councilman
Hastings, sorry. It's getting late.
Yeah. I have a really deep voice for a woman, but all right, Chair. I know it's getting late. I wanted to ask just a personal question. I guess we can get a chuckle out of this. Who coached you to be here today?
Coached me?
Yeah, because you're good. I just wanted to let you know you're good.
Not a coach.
It's just all you. It's just all you.
Who
right?
I am, who I have been for a very long time. This is me. What you see is what you get.
Well,
You're making me sweat though. I'm just kind of holding it together.
Yeah,
right
I know it's a hot seat, but I just wanted to say you're doing an awesome job. And while you're there, it was like, man, who coached her? Somebody's really, really good. Somebody's been here before. So I encourage you, no matter what goes on here, and I have spoke to you prior to in our meeting, is to let you know you continue on the quest that you're on to achieve and to do greater things. Because I really know that the push and the drive that you're on, the sky is the limit. And I wanted to give you that. If all things are possible and God opens up doors for you, continue to go, all right?
Thank you.
I wanted to also ask you this question. What makes you different from any other candidate that came before us today? And what is that one characteristic that you have yourself that is going to change the seat, the position that you're going to be in as the justice or the judge of the court from whatever that you're placed in?
I believe that the candidate slate that's come before you all have probably provided some great things as an entire panel of candidates. And so I can't really speak to direct characteristics of them because I don't necessarily know them deeply enough to say how I differ in that area. But what I can tell you is everything you have heard and seen of me in this meeting and other meetings that you've had is just me. I mean, I think the biggest thing I can tell you is that I am truly passionate about this. And I think passion is everything. If you love what you do and you're passionate about your work, then it shows and you're able to do good work. So I don't know what the people who came before me or who coming later will say or have said, but what I can tell you is about me.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Again, I commend you, and I definitely push for you to continue on. I'm a native of the city as well, so I'm looking for greater things to happen in your life. All right? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Hastings. Council Lady Blaylock.
Thank you, Chair. So you say you're not really in the highly, I guess, working with civil. One question I guess I would have is, how do you feel about high interest and consumer collection debt and abuses in that area?
I think that, so all of these things are sort of intertwined with each other. When you have people who already can't make their ends meet and they have to turn to high interest credit cards or high interest loans that create a drowning situation that they can't get out of, then I think that creates all types of financial problems that that make people have collections issues, that make people have bankruptcy problems, that then create hopelessness in people that then lead them over to our world of the criminal justice system. They are all intertwined. The gap between the wealthy and the poor in our country is really widening, and that is unfortunate. And so I'm not a fan at all of high interest credit. I hate that there are check cashing places on most corners in my community. And I think it's a cycle that once you start to get yourself into, you can't get out of it.
Thank you. And one other question. How many attorneys do you think you're familiar with in a percentage basis for the people that are currently would currently come before you if you were the judge in general sessions?
A lot. I would say lawyers that would come before the general sessions court, I know at least over 70% of them. We're a pretty small community in the courthouse of people who do this type of work, so I would know quite a few of them.
And you may or may not know the answer to this, but of those people, how many do you think are actually a member of the bar?
I have no idea. I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Council Lady. I think that's it in the queue. Ms. Johnson, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
I know it's 8 o'clock. You can stay around if you'd like, or you can go home. All right, thank you very much. So we have two more candidates. The next one is Nick McGregor. So I will say, while we're waiting for Mr. McGregor, here he comes, is that tomorrow night we will probably have just gotten started for the council meeting. Yeah. So Nick McGregor, Mr. McGregor, thank you for being here. We had some members sneak out, but I think they're coming back in. But we will go ahead and start. So a couple of questions to get started, and then I'm going to give you 2 to 3 minutes to introduce yourself to the members of the council. One, have you been licensed to practice law by the Supreme Court of Tennessee for at least 5 years?
Yes, sir.
All right. And have you been a resident of Nashville, Davidson County for at least 5 years?
Yes, sir.
And are you not less than 30 years of age or more than 65 years of age?
That's correct.
All right. And you filed a timely and appropriate questionnaire and resume, according to the clerk's office, so you're good to go. Give you 2 to 3 minutes to say whatever you'd like to the members of the council.
All right, well, yeah, thank you. Good evening. My name, like Mr. Schulman said, Nick McGregor. I practice criminal law, mainly criminal defense. I represent people in cases as petty as trespassing to as big as allegations of first-degree murder. Many of the cases that I take on are by way of appointment, which means a lot of these defendants are indigent. Not all of them, but many of the cases I take on are indigent, which has given me the ability to meet people all walks of life. Some of the things that I've done in my law practice are help people get into drug court. I've helped people get into some of the in-jail programs for rehabilitation and even assisted them in finding living after their incarceration. One of my big things for anybody that I've met, you've heard me say this, incarcerating the right people is just as important as not incarcerating the wrong people. One of my big things is helping the people that need to be helped. And some people we do see with lengthy criminal records, but that doesn't mean they're excluded from getting our help. And that's going to be how I focus. That's going to be what I focus on when taking the bench, helping the people that can be helped.
All right. Thank you. Questions from members of the council? Council Lady Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. You have been, in your career, have been into General Sessions Court room. So what is your observation? Is it working well? And if it's not, what plan do you have to improve the General Sessions Court system?
Well, at times it does work well, and many times people do get a fair outcome. But one of the things that can be helped is work ethic, and that's something that I would bring to the bench, is work ethic. Get there on time, start on time, and give everybody their fair shot. Because one of the things you don't want to have is people who leave court feeling like the system did them wrong, or the judge was disinterested in their case, or the judge let something else influence his or her decision. And being on the bench would be something that I'd be willing to have the patience to listen to everybody. If you brought family members, I'd want to hear from them too, because family members are just as influential as the court system. And so to answer your question, the General Sessions Court definitely has some things that work very well. Sometimes it has things that don't work as well, but a work ethic and professionalism are what I would bring to the bench to make sure that the courtroom that I was in was run appropriately.
Thank you. On behalf of Council Lady Murphy, I will ask, are you planning to, if you are to be appointed, are you planning to learn in 18 months?
Absolutely.
And also, you attached it, what is your thought about specialty court?
Specialty court, I love all the specialty courts, and I've had experience with each of them, and I'll kind of just go down each of them for you. Drug court, I think drug court has a lot of potential to help a lot of people. Anytime you're dealing with people who are addicted to serious drugs like meth and heroin, they need specialty assistance. They're not people where incarceration is going to help them, because incarceration doesn't teach you how to get off of those drugs when you leave jail. The specialty courts are very important, and drug court in particular, and I've had a number of people be screened for and accepted into drug court. Cherished Hearts is a newer one. For those of you who don't know, it's the human trafficking court. The specialty court, and I think the world of that, and I had a meeting on Friday with Assistant District Attorney Deb Smith, who was able to talk to me a little bit more about it. And what it is it's for people it's for women who are engaged in prostitution and find themselves not just in prostitution, but in thefts, in simple possession cases. And anybody, an attorney, a district attorney, a probation officer, a judge who finds that someone has a background of prostitution can suggest that they be screened. And one of the issues that you have when you don't have a court like this is you have people who, they go to jail, and when they get out, they have nothing to go back to except for their promoter, except for their human trafficker. And what this court does is it teaches them how to get away from that. It assists with drug use. It assists with teaching them that You don't have to live this life, because many of them, as I've found, as I've represented a number of them, many of them got into this life in their teens, and either their parents were doing it or their parents let it happen. So they don't know another life. And I'll say this just to elaborate on it. Ms. Smith told me that Judge Turner has taken the reins of it now. And one of the things I'd like to comment on, I think that's very good. Although I would be absolutely willing to help, I think a female judge needs to be in charge of cherished hearts. And I say that because when you're dealing with victims of prostitution, you have aspects that require someone who knows the female anatomy. That doesn't mean I wouldn't be around to help them on their release from these halfway houses, or that wouldn't mean that I'd be against helping in any way, shape, or form. But I can, as a judge, I could recognize where I can help and where others might be best served if I let someone else do it. There's another, I'll talk about another one. It's called ACT, and it's kind of on the fence whether or not it's going to stick around. And it's for casual users of drugs. You get to live at home, you get to still keep your job, but it teaches you how to get off of these drugs if you just have a casual use problem. If you don't like your paycheck going to cocaine, marijuana, it teaches you how to get off of those drugs before you get a full-blown habit. Now, I know the man who runs it, he said, we won't take meth, we won't take heroin, you need serious help for those things. But those are some of the specialty courts. I've had experience with people in mental health courts. I've had experience with people in veterans court. And I think that any time you can give someone whose unique circumstance is particular to them the attention that they need, you're going to help them a lot more than you would just incarcerating them.
Thank you. Appreciate the answer.
Thank you, Council Lady. Council Lady Haywood.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. McGregor, if you were actually selected to serve in this capacity, and now you're in your judgeship, what would be your mission statement? If each one were asked to share a mission statement that would actually be put on the wall, if you just take a second to share, what do you think your mission statement would be?
Easy, 2 words, help first. That would be it. If you look to help people first, you can help them avoid getting sucked into the cycle that is incarceration, reincarceration, incarceration, reincarceration, going back out there, finding that they don't have any means other than stealing, other than selling drugs. Yeah, help first. That would be my mission statement.
Okay, and thank you. I like that. In terms of, let's see, the way, now I'm going to regress, okay? In terms of morals and values, how were they placed within you as a child growing up? I don't know if you came from mom, dad, silver, gold spoon in your mouth, I don't know. But in terms of the way you were raised, could you tell me something about how morals and values were incorporated in your life?
Yeah, by all means. And I'll tell you this, I grew up with both my parents. Both of them were married before I was born and are still married. I grew up in Southern California. I went to a Catholic school, so they had me go to private school, and then I went to a public high school because the public high school near where I lived offered a great education. It was homework first. I played sports, and they were very involved in my life to make sure that I had the freedom that I wanted to be growing up, but not so much that I would find myself in trouble. And I can compare that with a lot of these families that I meet representing defendants, in particular indigent defendants. Not everybody grows up the same. I mean, everybody in this room knows not everybody grows up the same. And I'll tell you, when you have dinner with the parents of somebody who's incarcerated, and you sit there and you hear their story or their grandmother's story, and they think, like, how did this go wrong? This wasn't who we raised. And you start to say, well, here's what we can do to help. Here's what we can do to make sure that they don't fall back into this. Because when you're 18, 19, 20 years old, you have a much different look at the world than your parents do. And some of these people have parents who are working 2 jobs just to support them. And the parents care so much. They think the world of their kids, but the kids can't realize it because the mom or dad, or sometimes single parent, they're out working. And so they get the freedoms on their own. That's where as soon as you can get a hold of them, you got to teach them, look, there are aspects of your life that you're going to have total control over. And if you make these mistakes, some of them can be permanent. But if we show you, if we give you the tools as to how to get out of it, if we say, look, here's how you apply for jobs. A lot of people don't know that. You'd be surprised, some of these people coming out of these specialty courts, they're 40 years old. They've never had a job, and they don't know how to apply for a job. And you sit down with them and say, look, these are the applications. If they say to themselves, if they are worried about, do you have a criminal record? You tell them, put on there, we'll explain, and have them call me, and I'll explain to them the circumstances so it doesn't look like you're just a thief or it doesn't look like you're a drug user, and I can tell them exactly what happened. So kind of back to your question is, on the bench, I would recognize that not everybody grew up like me, and everybody should have a voice, and everybody's opinion matters. And I'll tell you, some of these mothers that come in, when they catch wind that their kids have done something wrong, there's nothing the judge could do to them that's any worse than what the mother will do to them.
Okay, great. One last question I have. At the end of the night, we will have interviewed 7 candidates. And if I asked you the question, not really knowing all the others, but in your heart, why should we select you? The number one reason why you feel like you should be selected, how would you respond?
I tell you this, I have represented, like I said, indigent defendants, and I have engulfed myself in criminal law. And I know that there's a chance that maybe this court will have some civil law too, and I have experience in civil law, but bulk of my practice is criminal law. And I have seen these defendants and their families. And when you're a judge making a decision on whether or not somebody gets another shot on probation or somebody needs some type of help, it's important to have met them. It's important to have met them, a number of them, to understand this person really needs my help, or this is the type of help they don't know that they need, and I can give it to them. Or this person is just putting on a show to get out of jail, and perhaps incarceration would be a better punishment. Oh. And I was just saying, what I bring to the table is I've been engulfed in that, and even though I haven't worked as a prosecutor, I've interviewed victims, I've interviewed police officers, and every aspect of general sessions I've been able to put myself through.
Great. Well, I thought that was my last question, but another question has been placed on my heart. And it doesn't have to be a lengthy answer, but if I asked you to define integrity, what would be your definition of integrity?
Professionalism, courtesy, and don't be afraid to put other people first.
Thank you.
Thank you, Council Lady Haywood. Councilman Hastings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really appreciate that. All right. Back to you. I would like to say thank you for taking the opportunity to come before us on this long night and being in the hot seat. And I see that you are very, very seasoned when it comes down to the criminal court and all of that good stuff. And that gives you kind of more of an ease of you as a candidate for this position, because you will be working mostly in the criminal element to that here in the city in general sessions, unless there's a change that they do. But like I've asked every person today, is to give us a piece of your mind in this area. What makes you different? And I know you guys had the opportunity to sit back with the rest of the candidates, and you have been acquainted with them before. But what makes you different from the other candidates that have come before us today that makes you better suited for the seat in the general sessions? And while you're doing that, what makes you best, I don't know, maybe better equated to handle the things that are coming towards you as the judge sitting into the seat?
Well, first thing, and this is not a negative towards any of the other applicants, but my work ethic. My work ethic is tremendous. I'm very goal-driven, and sometimes I see myself even working, all weekend, 7 days a week, evenings, whatever it takes, because the idea that you can help someone who normally does not have a voice is very powerful, and you can do that even more as a judge. And that doesn't, I'm not taking away from anybody else's work ethic. I just know that I know mine. And then in terms of things that I can bring to the table in terms of special skills, I'll tell you this, I'm very patient. And that is a very important aspect to General Sessions judge, because you get this feel that it's how fast can we hurry up the docket? How fast can we get through this? Or you get this feel that you're just like the last person who came out here and begged for mercy. No, I don't need to hear everybody that you brought with you. I just want to hear you. I'm very patient, and I'm willing to work with people. And I'll tell you, I've even had experiences where I thought, you know, some of the judges that we have could even be patient. And you see people who are really trying hard, and if you don't have, and I'll give you a more specific example, drug court. You see people who are trying their hardest, right? And I haven't been through rehab. I haven't had a substance abuse problem. So as a judge, you may be inclined to think, well, if you're testing positive, you're not serious about this. But if you bring it back to the patients, and you bring it back to my experience dealing with people who have gone through drug rehab, you say, you know what? I can identify who is kind of throwing it in my face, and I can identify who's really trying, and another chance is going to give them the possibility of success. So work ethic and patience would be the two things that I would say.
I'd like to say thank you for your special skills, and thank you for taking this chance to come before us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. That was the last person in the queue. Mr. McGregor, thank you for being here. Thank you for staying so late.
Yes, thank you guys for sticking around, too.
We appreciate it. And you can either stay around or you can head home. It's now 8:20, so you can do what you want. All right. Thank you very much. And Tillman Payne is our last candidate, and I think Rosie has gone to get him. Welcome, Mr. Payne. Thank you for waiting so long. You get to sit in this chair right here. All right, no problem. All right.
Glad to be here.
And we do appreciate you waiting long. We'll tell you that, again, we understand the importance of this, and so that's why we've been taking as many questions as we needed to get through this. So, Mr. Payne, just a couple of questions before we start. You've been licensed to practice law by the Supreme Court of Tennessee for at least 5 years. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. And you've been a resident of Nashville, Davidson County for at least 5 years, these past 5 years, all right?
That is correct.
And you are not less than 30 years old or more than 65 years of age.
That is correct.
That is correct. And again, you timely filed your appropriate questionnaire resume with the clerk's office. We understand that. That was required by the Council Rule 44. So, Mr. Payne, what we'd like to do is ask you to take 2-3 minutes to just introduce yourself to the members of the council.
Thank you.
And that's your microphone. There you go.
All right, thank you. My name is Tillman Payne. I live in District 34 in Davidson County. I've lived in that district for the past 14 years. Prior to that, I was in the U.S. Air Force. I spent 20 years there, retired as Lieutenant Colonel. Originally, I'm from Carthage, Tennessee, about 50 miles east of here, so I've grown up coming to Nashville all my life. And when I moved here, I intended to make this my home. I believe I have the temperament, the discipline to serve as a General Sessions judge effectively and honorably. I know I have the skills. I believe I should offer my skills to the court system. I believe in diversity in the bench, both in gender, ethnicity, race, and I also believe that there should be a diversity of experience, and I think I bring, because of my military background and the fact that I own a couple of businesses, that diversity in business and experience also, and I also had that military career. I would be the first African-American male to serve on the General Sessions Court since A.A. Birch served back in 1969, and I believe that my past legal experience and my military experience qualify me to do a good job and bring a little bit of freshness to the Davidson County bench. I've already just demonstrated my ability to understand the law and apply the law. In my 14 years of practicing law, I've done civil, criminal, cases at both the General Sessions level, the civil court, circuit court level, and the appellate court level, and all with success. In addition to that, I believe I've demonstrated the ability to run a business. I've owned 2 businesses with my wife. Now, she'll tell you she runs them all herself, and that is correct. I am just an assistant to her, and she runs pretzel stores in Opera Mills Mall, Rivergate Mall, and Bowling Green. I've been active in my community. I'm a member of Bethel World Outreach Church, where I've been worked in the children's ministry. I've been a greeter, an usher, and I'm an usher right now. I've always been respectful and patient with both my clients, opposing attorneys, jurors, and the bench. Anyone that's encountered me in the practice of the law will agree with that, I'm sure. I understand how judicial decisions affect people in the court, and I believe that I have the ability to listen calmly to both sides and render a fair verdict. I understand this is a position of public trust, and that I have the ability to withstand not only that scrutiny, because I understand that it happens in the public forum, and I'm ready for that challenge. I think I have the necessary temperament, discipline, experience, education, integrity, and character, and I would serve the court with distinction and honor as a general judge here in Davidson County.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. Questions from the council? Council Lady Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Payne, sticking around this late. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. No problem.
Just curious, you mentioned diversity, and you mentioned race, gender, and ethnicity. Do you believe sexual orientation and sexual identity as a part of diversity?
Do I think they're part of diversity? I do.
So I just want to make sure you just kind of evidently left that portion out.
I apologize.
No problem. So I understand you have so many experience in a general session courtroom as well. So what is your observation of the general sessions courtroom? Is it running well, or if it's not running well, what is your plan to improve it?
I've been in general sessions courts all throughout Middle Tennessee as an assistant public defender, where I had to handle the entire docket, basically. And I've been in court where I've only had 1 or 2 cases as a private attorney. One of the things about general sessions court is that because there's such a volume there, it needs to be run efficiently. It needs to start on time, and there needs to be an efficient process. As a general sessions judge, what I would do is I would ensure that first of all, I have an understanding between myself and the district attorney who handles all the prosecutional cases there to ensure that we are trying to handle cases in an expeditious manner. Start on time. Let's have your witnesses here. The same thing with the defense attorneys. Get started on time, and let's be efficient and get this done. I believe starting early and running the court as efficiently as possible. And I'd work with the team of both police officers, the prosecutors, the defense attorneys, and if in civil cases, both the plaintiff attorneys and defense attorneys in those cases, to ensure that they understand that everything's going to be run efficiently and right on time. I think the court, what I've seen is that in court, in these general sessions courts, it can get bogged down by people being late, long hearings that probably should be scheduled specifically for certain dates and set at a certain time. And I think those kinds of things will expedite the process and also make it more efficient for everybody, make a more pleasant experience.
Thank you. And so if you were to be selected by us for judge's position, are you planning to run for election?
Yes, I intend to run for the term that's left, that's next year, and also in 2022 also.
And what is your position or feeling about the specialty courts?
The drug court and the treatment court, I have when I was in the military, I got a master's in human relations, and basically what that was is how to set up programs to benefit people, whether it's family counseling or those kind of things. So I have an affinity for those kinds of courts. I do believe, and because in my practice, I believe that people that have these kinds of problems need opportunities and options other than just the legal criminal option. And so I would support them. I think that one thing about anyone that's had an addiction, I think that they have to have as many opportunities to try to resolve that addiction as possible. You're not going to necessarily quit smoking the first time you try. You're not going to necessarily quit drinking the first time you try. So you've got to have a comprehensive program that deals with people in the various stages. Someone might be able to go through the program and get it done in one time, but you got to have a strong core. So I would support both of those. I think both of those are great ideas.
Thank you. My last question is the criminal justice system in general. Do you think people deserve to be in jail?
Some people deserve to be in jail, but not everyone. There's we put way too many people in jail, and the specialty courts are an example of where you don't necessarily need to put people in jail all the time. You need to try to help them overcome what is causing them to come to jail. And so no, I think our criminal justice system now spends way too much time putting people in jail. Like I said, I practice in all these different courts all through Middle Tennessee, and I'll tell you, the Davidson County courts are better. The further you get away from Davidson County into the smaller communities, that you may get jail time for some of the most minor crimes that you would be very surprised that people are actually serving jail time for. So how do you reform that? I basically would not. I'd be encouraging the DAs to work these cases out that can be worked out in general sessions court. Don't send these cases up to criminal court and clog those trial court dockets. Let's work them out in general sessions court, and let's give these people an opportunity to overcome these problems when there's an opportunity to do that. But if you've got somebody that's dangerous or is hurting people, you've got to put them in jail to keep them away from society and protect them.
Thank you, Mr. Payne.
Thank you, Council Lady Johnson.
Thank you.
Council Lady Haywood.
Thank you. I'm interested in knowing what motivated you in terms of the military and the highlights of your military experience. How long did you serve, in what branch? And I'd like to hear a little bit about your military experience.
Well, what motivated me is that I felt I was always enjoyed the idea of the military. When I went to college, my father had encouraged me to consider ROTC, which I tried it for a year, quit because I thought it was too regimented. And then I started realizing, you know what, this is a good program, and I could have a career or basically get some better training because it offered a lot of, I thought, discipline. So I was lucky enough to get a scholarship in ROTC, and they paid for part of my schooling and my books. So I got commissioned, and once I was commissioned, I really enjoyed. I was a logistics planner, supply, transportation, maintenance. Basically, what I would do is organize the preparation of equipment and men to go to a certain location to operate in a location. For example, if we said we need to fly airplanes out of Taiwan, I would say, okay, here's the people you need, here's all the equipment you need, here's how many airplanes you're taking, this is the quantity of equipment, here's where they're going to get their fuel from, et cetera, and we fly those packages. I did that the entire career, which is unusual because usually you're a maintenance officer, then you go into planning. But I had assignments all over the world. Some of the highlights is that back in 1992, there was a RIF, a reduction in force, and they were outing officers and enlisted folks too. And I realized that I might not be able to continue in the military, and so I took a job at Montgomery, Alabama to teach a class. And everyone told me, don't take that class, don't teach that class, it'll kill your career because you're not operational. So what I did was, I said, no, I was a single parent at the time, and I had a young son. I said, no, I'm going there because I may have to get out anyway, more stability. And I taught the class and developed the logistics plans class and got offered a promotion. And with that promotion came the choice of either getting out and actually going to Vanderbilt Law School or going to do something, or taking the promotion and continue in the military. And I said, well, I'm going to try to go. I want to take my sons to take the promotion because I can't be poor. So I said, okay, fine. I took the promotion and was able to go to law school at George Mason University, and while I was at the Pentagon. And when I was at the Pentagon, the job I had there was a logistics planner. I was on a team called Checkmate, and what we did as we did what-if planning. We might get a task, say, hey, there's, what if we had to fly airplanes out of this location? How long would it take us to get there, et cetera? They might ask us questions like, well, how quickly would it take you to prepare these types of weapons at this location in the Middle East? And we'd calculate that and present it to the general officers. following that, I was fortunate enough to be selected to be executive officer, which is basically the right-hand man of a general officer. While I was at the Pentagon, I did that for 2 general officers, civilian-level general officer folks at Logistics Plans. And when I left the Pentagon, I went to the Defense Logistics Agency and did the same thing. I was an assistant to a general officer. This was an admiral in one case, and then it was a 2-star general in another case. But all that time, I wanted to go to law school, and I was able to enroll, and I was continuing law school while I was doing those things. And I got my law school education in 1999 and still had about 2 or 3 more years before I could even consider retirement. And I got reassigned to Hawaii, so that was my last assignment. But it was a great experience. I'd have to tell anyone that had an opportunity. I think everybody should spend some time in the military.
So how many years?
20 years.
20 years. So I don't know what this has to do with anything, but I have a grandson that's in the 9th grade, and he's in ROTC, and he can't wait to finish up because he said he would never go into ROCT again. And I think that's what you shared.
That's right.
And it's for the same reason. He says too structured. So I don't necessarily have to give up on him. Okay.
No.
Okay.
There's a reality that sets in, because if you're good at something, and I was fairly good at the ROTC.
Okay.
And I knew that, because when I went back, they offered me the scholarship. But for me, I thought I didn't want to be controlled like that. But then I realized that there's lots of other opportunities. Because when I signed up, what I thought to myself is, you know what? I'm going to go to Spain. I've never lived in Spain. I want to go to Spain. And my second assignment was Spain for 3 years. And I, got to travel the world. So,
thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Council Lady. Councilman Cooper.
Quickly, when you went to law school, how did you get into the practice that you have now?
Okay. I applied to George Mason while I was in Montgomery, Alabama, got accepted. Went there in 1995, graduated in 1999 because I was full-time Air Force, and it was a part-time program. It's now called the Antonin Scalia School of Law at George Mason University. I was able to basically attend classes after I left my Pentagon job for about 4 years, every afternoon for about 4 hours a night.
Mr. Payne, let me get you speaking to the mic.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay,
and then once I completed that, I did some pro bono work. Basically, what I did was I took leave from the military from time to time, and I volunteered at the Legal Services in Northern Virginia, where they would have indigent families that needed some type of work. Most times it was mostly uncontested divorces. And so I did that just because I wanted some experience of what it was like to be in a courtroom and to practice law. Did that until I was assigned to Hawaii. Did it for about 2 years. And then when I was assigned to Hawaii, I didn't practice law, and then was there for a year and a half. Came back to the States, and since I'm from Carthage, I know General Thompson, who's the DA in that GIST district, and I went and talked to him. He said, hey, I think you can probably get a job at the Public Defender's Office. And I got hired there, worked there for 5.5 years, doing criminal defense, everything from, small misdemeanor cases, did a few juvenile cases, all the way up to first-degree murder cases. I did jury trials, many preliminary hearings, et cetera. And after about 5.5 years of practicing as a assistant public defender, I went out into private practice and opened up an office, one in Carthage and one in Nashville, because I lived in Nashville. And in that practice, I had both civil and criminal cases. Did a few things like workers' comp, but that kind of petered out, and wasn't very profitable for me, so I cut that out and did a few Social Security disability cases. But I've done cases everywhere from traffic citations in Davidson County, in front of the General Sessions Courts, all the way up to first-degree murder cases, full jury trials in Davidson County. And the civil side, I've done detainer motions, small civil suits, and I've also done those at circuit court. I've got a case pending right now related to property line disputes and that was not a jury trial, that's a bench trial with a judge. And so I've done a lot of different types of things, and mostly working for people because it's a private practice, and you pretty much take what comes in the door, and you adjust and you adapt, and I've been successful at it, and I continue to do it.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Hastings.
Thanks again, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to direct, I'm not going to ask my usual question that I asked everybody today because you are quite an esteemed and a different guy that have done a lot of other things besides just the courtroom. So that is really, really exciting to hear. Out of everything, I think I was lost in between. I know the things that you did in the military, but I didn't hear what branch of service that you were a part of. So you can just answer that a part of it, and that will be good for me. But my question is simply, why at this time do you feel that this is your season and you should run for this seat? Being such a different system. Of course, we have a lot of things that are going on within this sector. Of course, the judge that was sitting in the seat for years, and of course, he probably did a lot of great things beforehand. But why is this the moment for you and all of your accolades and everything that you have done within the community and for your family and traveled the world? Why do you feel you are the one to be able to take this seat to another level? And I just wanted to hear that, and also the branch that you served as well. Okay. Thank you, sir.
I apologize. I was in the Air Force, the U.S. Air Force. That's not, I could say it's an easy question to answer, but the answer is that, as you go through life, you gain experience, and and in my case, I've tried to find things that I feel like I can plug in and do something good. Military was very rewarding to me. I cannot say anything negative about the experience. My practice of law as a public defender was extremely rewarding to me. I saw an aspect of society I never really knew existed, and it taught me a lot. I went into private practice because I wanted to experience that, to see if I could make that work, and I was able to do that. And going through that process, you see opportunities. You have to, in my mind, you have to take those opportunities when they present themselves. And that's what I'm doing. I see that this is an opportunity for me to make a contribution because of what I've seen in General Sessions Court. I think I have the experience, background, character, integrity, et cetera, to make a good judge. And I think that because of that, I'm duty bound to offer my services to the court and offer my services to the citizens of Davidson County. I just feel it's the right thing for me to try to do.
Just following up to that, did you think about pursuing the judgeship even before this opportunity?
Yes, I did. And I wanted to, before I put my hat in the ring, I wanted to make sure I had I guess, paid my dues as far as being qualified. So, I thought about it, and I looked at the possibility of maybe even running prior to this last election. But I felt that, one, I hadn't really made the connections, and I still had some things I could do in the civil side. So to build my experience, and so I did not. But at this point in time, I've been thinking about it. I've been considering it, and I thought that I think this is the right time.
Now, what are one of the things that you yourself would think that you honestly would need more, you would wish to have more experience in prior to you actually running for a seat? Let's just say this opportunity did not happen right now.
Right.
And you evaluate yourself as you have done prior to, correct? Right. So what is one of the things that you would say in a magical world that you would say, I need to strengthen this one leg in order for me to be the perfect person to head up a court? system?
I think I pretty much shored up all the things I wanted. For example, when I came out of the public defender's office, obviously it was all criminal. So I didn't have much experience in doing civil. So I've done quite a bit of that. So I felt that that's been taken care of. I think probably it's more of the political thing. I'm not really a political person. I think that if you're gonna, these judgeships are elected offices, and I don't have really any experience in politics. So I think I'm capable of that. I think someone could appoint me to run a court right this minute, and so I don't have any issues with that. But I don't know that I have the experience to run a campaign. I don't know if I could. That would be different for me.
All right. Well, I would like to thank you for being honest and taking this opportunity to come before us to ask you crazy questions like that. I know that this seat is an elected position. So one of the things wisdom that I will give you as being an elected official myself is to tell you get ready, because it's a lot of work. And there's a lot of shaking hands, kissing babies, and being truthful and honest to the people that you are going to represent. The people who are coming before you are trusting your ideas and you yourself to do the best that they can do with their family. So thank you again very much.
Thank you, Thank you, Councilman. You were the last person in the queue. Mr. Payne, thank you for being here. Thank you for staying so late. We very much appreciate it. And as I've told everybody else who was here, you are welcome to stay or you can go home. But I will tell you that if you stay, you're going to be the only person here. That's right. All right. So, Mr. Payne, thank you. Members of the council, thank you all for staying so late. We understood that this was important. Again, the Vice Mayor made it very clear that this is a very important step for the council. Very important for what's going on with the judiciary and the General Sessions Court. Filling this vacancy is an important step. I will tell you that I've been very impressed with all the questions and very good, very pleased. So thank you, and I look forward to seeing all of you tomorrow.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information about this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.